If we're ready to get started, then let's proceed with a roll call.
Good evening, everyone. Hold on one second. Sorry, we've got new equipment in the council chambers, and it's taking a little getting used to. Anyway, Commissioner Arriaga,
Present.
Commissioner Meyer,
Present.
Commissioner Benson,
Present.
Commissioner Freitas,
Present.
and Commissioner Lazar.
Here.
Thank you.
So I guess I'll just walk us through our salute to the flag. So please put your right hand over your heart. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Moving right on to the approval of minutes. As I was absent for the last Planning Commission meeting. So approve the Planning Commission study session meeting minutes on August 5th, 2021, and regular Planning Commission meeting minutes of August 9th, 2021. Let's see.
Would you like a motion, Commissioner Arriaga?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just having really bad feedback on my end. I would like a motion.
This is Craig Benson, and I will make a motion to accept the study session meetings of August 5th and the regular commission meeting minutes of August 9th as written.
Second.
Can we do a roll call on that, please?
We sure can. I just didn't hear the second.
I gave a second.
Thank you, Meredith. Okay, so names again. Commissioner Meyer,
Yes.
Commissioner Benson,
Aye.
Commissioner Freitas,
Aye.
Commissioner Lazar,
Yes.
and Commissioner Arriaga.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion
Thank you.
carries.
So moving right on to any oral communications.
We had no one request to speak under oral communications, Madam Chair.
Awesome. Okay, well, if no one's slated for that, then moving right on to the public hearings, which I believe is the Beta the Zoo Trail CEQA.
This is the point of Commissioner Arriaga that I need to recuse myself from the commission for the purposes of discussing the Bay to Zoo Trail, as my family has real property in the trail right of way, and I will instead choose to speak as during the public comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Benson.
And Commissioner Benson, if you could just please turn off your audio, excuse me, your video, not your audio. Thank you. So this evening, we have a staff report that we would like to present to you, and we're going to hear from Public Works staff. Scott Elsmore is the project manager, city engineer Jesse Willer, and Director of Public Works Brian Gervin.
Sounds good. Take it away, you guys. Thank you.
Perfect. So, hey, this is Scott Elsmore. Welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight. Let's see, can you give me the screen share so I can pop up a PowerPoint? I guess I gotta take it on.
It should be on.
Okay, give me a second here. Let's see. Let's see. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Should say City of Eureka Beta Zoo Trail Public Works Department.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thanks. So, tonight, I know we didn't have everybody there at the last meeting, so I'm going to talk about a little bit of a review of the Beta Zoo Trail in general, as well as touch on some of the things that we talked about at the last couple of Planning Commission meetings. And then following myself, there'll be Jesse Willer, City Engineer, with some follow-up thoughts, as well as Brian Gerbing, Director of Public Works. So I'll try to make this brief because, like I said, some of this will be a little bit of a review, but bear with me. Some of the things we'll talk about tonight are history, public outreach, phases and funding, as well as timelines and steps forward. So what is the Beta Zoo Trail and where are we at currently? So why are we here tonight? And this is kind of a recap of the last couple of meetings we've had. So some of the things we discussed, and I'll touch on these a little bit as well. So what is the trail? Why is it important? How does it fit in the transportation network of the city? What is the role of the environmental document? And what are the phases in the future of the project? Some of the things we talked about at the last couple of meetings, were some concerns of the commission. We talked about street crossings, on-street bike facilities, parking lot, level of design, trail access, landowners, and right-of-way. So what is the decision tonight for the Beta Zoo Trail? Are we approving a final design tonight? No, we're not. Are we approving specifically a Class 3 bike facility at this point? No, we are not. Are we approving a specific street design crossing plans? No, we're not. Are we approving the exact trail alignment tonight? No, we're not. So with approving the environmental document, we are determining if the project has significant impacts on the environment. Approving this environmental document allows us to go to the next step forward in the project. And we'll talk about this a little bit later as we go. But as those steps go in this type of project, the next step after the environmental document would be applying for funding. At that point, that would allow us to complete the right-of-way phase, which is in consultation with individual landowners. That's when we meet with the landowner and negotiate property access and start rectifying the actual trail alignment. Once those steps are done, the environmental and the right-of-way, then we can complete final design consistent with the environmental document as well as the right-of-way. So what is the Beta Zoo Trail? Again, we've talked about this. This might be a review, but it's a proposed trail in the planning process currently. It connects the waterfront trail near Tidd Street in the north with Sequoia Park Zoo in the south. This is approximately 3 miles in coverage from north to south. How does it fit within the non-motorized transportation planning network? Well, it's an integral part of it. It connects the entire east side of the city with the waterfront trail and the future Humboldt Bay Trail north. It connects Sequoia Park Zoo along with the surrounding neighborhoods and schools in between. It connects St. Joseph Hospital and Open Door, as well as future trail segments such as the Eureka Loop Trail or anything in the greater Eureka area, Cutton or McKay Tract. So why is it important? It's important for a number of reasons. Some of those being gaps in infrastructure, right? So if you look at the city being a gridded network, this area, this Gulch area is fairly, it lacks, connected transportation facilities. We also have a gap in the multimodal facility network. We just don't have a lot of separated pedestrian bicycle options. It can provide connectivity, right? It's important to have connections through these areas for neighborhoods, schools, and residents. It also provides a safe route to school connectivity. Collision rates, we've talked about this. Pedestrians and bicyclists are the most vulnerable road users. In pedestrian and vehicle collisions, pedestrians and bicyclists, they take the brunt of the damage, obviously. The city has historically had high rates of pedestrian and bicycle collisions, and this is a project to help minimize those. Opportunity. This is an opportunity here. There's just not a lot of options for areas that we can put a separated facility, right? So this is an area that is not developed that has room for that. This is one of those few locations that are remaining. It also has the opportunity to provide access to the greater public, right? So this is not just for one people or a few people. This is providing access to the greater good, to the public. Origin. So where did the Beta Zoo Trail come about? In 2000, the Eureka City Council created the Eureka Trails Committee. This committee discussed a greenbelt trail through Eureka that would connect the gulches and neighborhoods and schools and along with the waterfront. In 2016-17 school year, city staff along with the city schools identified the Beta Zoo Trail as a safe routes to school project, kind of enacting it. In 2018, it was important enough for the city council to prioritize it as a strategic visioning goal, and it remains that way today. So conceptual alignment. So these are maps that show conceptual trail alignment that we produce for part of the environmental document, and these are on the city's webpage. And these alignments allow us to describe what we call an APE, or area of project exploration, but it allows us to determine the project area where we could be working, where the trail would likely fall within. So this helps us define where the trail is going to go. Through that environmental process, it allows us to determine what are the environmental constraints or opportunities we have to work with. With those and that information, we then go through the right-of-way process once funds are established to go ahead and meet with landowners one-on-one and establish and negotiate access agreements and those types of things. So this has been on our website and it still is there. The link's there if folks are interested. I'm sure if you Google City of Eureka Beta Zoo website, this will pop up or similar. So public outreach. It started in 2018 when they kicked off for the first trail grant opportunity. There was phone call to joining property owners through that trail corridor. In 2018, there was a walking and a public meeting over at Zane for a Safe Routes to School workshop, and this was sponsored by Berkeley Safe Track. In 2019, the council accepted the grant funds for the environmental process, which we're working on tonight. In September 2019, there was a city council presentation about the Beta Zoo Trail. In 2020 of April, we started the environmental process. We reached out to adjoining property owners prior to environmental studies. In January 2021, there was a community meeting, as well as I believe this is our fourth planning commission meeting we've had kind of related to the subject. So phases and funding. This is an important thing that a lot of folks ask about. What's the process of the project? Where are we at now? Where are we going forward? But again, the Beta Zoo Trail is currently unfunded. We don't have funds for it. We received grant funds to complete the environmental document only, what we're working on tonight. So we have no other funds currently for the other subsequent phases of the project. Currently, our estimates are in the neighborhood of about $7 million to complete a project of this scope. So this is the Caltrans Active Transportation Program. It's one of the more common funding sources for this type of trail, pedestrian and bicyclist type project. This is what was used for the Eureka Waterfront Trail as far as for funding it. So this is a highly competitive statewide grant that's available every couple of years. The city has scored well for Beta Zoo, but not high enough to be funded in the last 2 rounds. So the next call for projects will be in 2022, and this is more of just an example of a funding source for funding a project of this scope and scale. So what are the phases of the project? We've touched on this a little bit earlier, and these are the phases that we look at for this type of project, and this is the order of implementation. So kind of the initial phase is environmental, what we're working on now. Determine the limits of the project, the approximate extents of the work along with the environmental constraints. So examine our footprint. Where are we working? What do we have to work around? Is there water? Is there trees? Is there critters? That helps us define where we need to be working. Once that's complete, you continue looking for funding. Once funding is obtained, then you start the right-of-way process. Right-of-way process takes that environmental information and you go meet with landowners, in our case, to negotiate access agreements to be able to get trail access. That would be the next phase. Once that's completed, then you begin the final design and permitting phase. Once you have a completed environmental document, you have the right-of-way obtained, then you go through final design, permitting. Once that's complete, then you start the construction phase. So those are kind of the iterative phases of a project of this type. So what's the timeline? This is a question we get asked a lot, is what's the timeline for this Beta Zoo Trail and the steps forward? This is a little bit of a repeat of what we just talked about, but again, the project's unfunded and environmental. So tonight we're hoping to adopt the environmental document. Once that occurs, then the next steps are, again, find funding to go to that next step. If we were to find funding, we would then go after the right-of-way phase where we meet with landowners and start working on trail access alignments and access agreements. Once right-of-way is accomplished and completed, then we go through design, final design, permitting, and go to construction. So that's kind of a nutshell of what we've been over the last couple of weeks and kind of the highlights of the trail. I'm going to hand it off at this point over to Jesse Willer, city engineer. And I think he has some follow-up points, as well as Brian Gerving after that.
Good evening, everybody. Glad to be joining you tonight to be talking about this this potential project that we have here in front of us. There's a lot of excitement around trying to extend and broaden the options we have for non-motorized transportation in the city of Eureka. So, it's always great to get together and be able to chat about these things. So it seemed like in the last meeting, there was some, the decision was deferred because there was some questions and some things that the commission wanted to have answers to. So I thought I would address a couple of those things real quickly. One of those items had to do with, ensuring bicycles and vehicles will not be incompatible on sections of pre-existing city roads. And kind of one thing to kind of step back from that and take a look at how we traditionally operate when it comes to transportation planning and design is when it comes to the environmental document, typically we have, I guess there's categorically exempt projects and there's projects that are not categorically exempt. And this project is in its entire length from down at the connection to the waterfront trail to its terminus, around the zoo and the park area. We have different types of areas which this project passes through, and some of which are more sensitive type habitats versus less sensitive habitats. When you get into the built out right away, typically our projects, when we do projects, whether they're bike lanes, other type of bike facilities, those fall into being categorically exempt because they are, there's very little impact that really results from them. You're talking about striping, signage, or maybe there would be some modifications to some parking or other things that would or crossings and that sort of thing, where really little impact to the environment versus like, say, when you're in a greenway and there's much more opportunity for impact there. That's why this entire project's at ISMND. But when we look at some of these sections where I know there was some concern, whether it be Dolby or W Street, or any of the interconnecting streets where there was discussion about having bicycle facilities on the streets. And those would be typical areas of like a categorically exempt type of project if it were a standalone project. Now, this is not a standalone project, it's part of a larger project. But I thought it was important to kind of highlight that because, looking at what the safety concerns might be of having a class 3 bike lane on a particular facility, that really, that's very much going down and deeper into what the design of the facility is and less about what the actual environmental, impact of that particular design might be. We really, I think, want to talk a little bit about I guess just to pause one more second on that and talk a little bit about, going from the environmental document onto design. We have standards and protocols that we have to follow in order to, meet our own guidelines that are standard for engineering and for transportation. We don't make those up. We typically rely on data and kind of past experience and a larger knowledge base of what the standards are. And so we just don't go and apply certain design fixes in areas where they wouldn't be warranted or wouldn't make sense to have them applied. So, and typically for CEQA, we would be somewhere between a preliminary and like a 30% design level. And that may not go into getting into the exact details of how each one of the bicycle facilities might operate, what it might be. We called out in this project description, class 3 bike lanes in one case. And that was really because we had applied for, it was a little bit of a holdover, I guess I should say, from the ATP application. We applied for that application. We had to apply certain design types because that's how the projects are graded. And based on whatever type of design type you add in there, there's benefits that come from that. So I think that was a holdover. And I know that kind of caused pause for the commission as far as able to move forward with the project because of that class 3 bike lane being in there. And I don't think there's any pressing need to identify a specific facility on those streets, whether Dolby or W in those areas, because we're not quite to that level of design yet where we've gone through and done our full analysis and being able to like determine, what is the best, kind of tool out of our toolbox to apply for this particular street in order to have a safe and functional facility, which is what we all want in the end. I think with that being said, we are going to make a recommendation that we change the project description from being very specific to having class 3 bike lanes and convert that to just referencing a bike facility. That way it allows the process of design to be completed and where we can actually go through and determine what makes the best fit for that particular area. So with that, I think Scott, we have, I think, is this our time we're going to transition to Brian? I believe it is. I don't think we're going to bring the proposed recommendation up at this point. So with that, I guess we'll bring Mr. Gerving on. Brian.
All right. Thank you, Jesse. And thank you, Scott, for describing where we are with the project and what comes next. And thank you to the commissioners and Madam Chair for having us this evening. As Scott described, the Beta Zoo Trail has been contemplated for over 20 years at this point. And 3 years ago, the council designated it as a priority as an expansion to what was then the recently completed waterfront trail, looking to extend those opportunities for citizens and visitors to get from inland portions of the city to the waterfront and exploring new sections of the city along the way. Since then, staff has been methodically working based on council's direction to move the project forward, developing that conceptual design, submitting multiple applications for grant funding, which is ultimately what resulted in where we are now, which is having received grant funding to complete the environmental document and move that forward. Next, we want to move forward even further to that right-of-way and design process and then construction. And as Scott and Jesse described, it's then that we will develop the level of detail that some have expressed a desire for in the previous planning commission meetings. And I'm sure will continue to be expressed tonight. But right now we're kind of at that 30% design phase that the city engineer described. And we believe that that level of detail combined with removing some of the specificity that was in the project description regarding the class 3 bike facility helped to move us forward tonight. So with that, we will have a revised motion to put in front of the commission should anyone desire to move that forward. And we would just respectfully request that the commission act on this tonight and approve the environmental document so that we can continue working in that direction that the council gave us and move forward with this trail, which will be a great asset for the city in the future.
Madam Chair, I think that is our presentation for this evening, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, you guys, for the details and the clarity. Commissioners, do you have anything for staff?
I have one question. So I originally heard, I believe, that the initial study was not modified in any way, but it sounds like, in fact, the project description has been modified, but instead of becoming more specific, it's become more generalized. So this is a slightly modified document from last meeting, just in a different way than we expected, potentially. Is that correct?
Kristen, you want to handle that one?
Sure. So yes, the proposal that staff is making this evening is basically to change references to class 3 bikeways or bike lanes to a more general description of bike facility. So that would, if the commission chose to move forward, that it would be included in your motion this evening, and that change would be made throughout the document as well as in the resolution that you'd be adopting.
Are there any more questions for staff, commissioners?
Yeah, I have a question. Thanks. And I wanted to say that I wanted to disclose before we got too much further along that Commissioner Freitas and I both talked about this. So in ex parte, in the spirit of ex parte, I wanted to say that our discussion involved the lack of information that was provided prior to the meeting tonight, and concern that it would be difficult to take action on anything that could be a change if it wasn't presented ahead of the meeting. I certainly can wrap my head around what was described by staff during their presentation, and I think the public can as well. One question I have is whether or not there was any consideration given, and if there's flexibility to at the crossings that would be at Booner Street and at Myrtle Avenue. It sounds like, in terms of generalizing the description of the Class 3 segment on existing street right-of-ways, the approach being offered is to remove the reference to an explicit bike improvement type. But with respect to those crossings, is the same flexibility there to revisit the possibility of a more extensive approach in terms of some of the public comments we've received beyond what was forecast and described in some of the earlier presentations? Does that make sense? I didn't hear anything about that in the discussion. That was one of the items talked about.
Sure, thanks. Thank you, Commissioner Lazar. Yeah, that specifically with the crossings, it's similar to what we're talked about with the bikeway, but we didn't feel that it was necessary to make any modifications to that. That those designs are not so far complete as they are, or they were presented in a way to try to what we're trying to accomplish is a high visibility crossing. We want to have bike and pedestrian facilities in the city of Eureka, and we want to make them safe. Going through and detailing out the design before being totally complete in the environmental document is difficult to do. And then it's kind of it's like a sliding scale of trying to work through every detail, early on before your project moves forward or even has funding to begin that next phase of development. And so while we've definitely heard those concerns, and we definitely will be looking at, taking those options into consideration with the design, it doesn't seem like there's a necessity to change it based on the environmental document and what would mean to approve and move that document forward.
Any other questions, commissioners?
I guess I do have a comment. I don't see if I can take a look at the checklist. I think I brought it up at the last meeting. It's in Appendix G, and I would just say that to the extent that this project, we have to consider the whole of the project under CEQA, not specific segments and which ones within the. I understood Mr. Biller's presentation talking about what would be ordinarily categorically exempt if they were just tackling a bike lane improvement on existing city streets. That certainly makes sense, but this is a much more comprehensive project, and it is inviting use and hopefully dramatically increasing the use of alternate forms of transportation, including pedestrian and cycling. And by bringing people into existing rights of way, we're introducing new risks associated with their use, and specifically on the on-street portion. So to the extent that the checklist does include language about creating something that would potentially result in safety risks, substantial safety risks, that is germane to our discussion tonight. But we're being asked, it sounds like, to put our faith in the ultimate design landing somewhere where safety has been tackled. Would staff agree that's a fair characterization, that staff believes that can ultimately be accounted for in the design that is finalized in the future?
Yeah, and we certainly take safety with the highest. We take that with the highest concern. It is the main aspect of when we're doing designs like this, is trying to make make a difficult situation as safe as possible. Can we build pedestrian bridges over every road that we have, or tunnels underneath every road? It'd be great if we could, but they're not a feasible option for us. And have we considered that in some cases when we're looking at Broadway and maybe trying to work with Caltrans to address some of those things we have? And those are certainly things that, we think about, and we try to apply, we try to apply the science base, the experience that is not just in the city of Eureka, but what is out there across the state of California and in the country when it comes to design standards. And we have to take safety into the highest consideration. It's a part of everyday life for us, and we really take it seriously. So I would say that is making sure that we have streets that are applicable for certain types of facilities is really important. These crossings, like you mentioned, these are certainly areas of where you have bikes and pedestrians crossing streets that have high traffic volumes. It's probably a reason why there haven't been situations where you have opportunities for trails or larger, you have to try to move people through certain corridors. But we just, in a built out city like Eureka, it's really difficult to say, to maybe remove traffic off of a roadway and say, okay, we're going to take all the vehicles off this roadway and make it a bike and pedestrian facility. That'd be great if we could do that. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be a reality of the way that we're laid out with the gulches and greenways and the different roads and the way they cross through the city. So I would say safety has to be taken in consideration in the design. It's imperative that it does. And we will definitely take that as the highest priority when it comes to looking at how these crossings function at Myrtle, Boone, Harris, and in a similar way with how the bike lanes and bike facilities are on Dolbeer and W. And we're not done of making that evaluation, when it comes to our design. So I think that's what I can say we would do for the design, is what we always do is try to take it as serious as possible and base it as much on kind of the science and the typical approaches that are out there, so that we can make as safe as facility as possible.
Right. If I could just add on to what Jesse said, in this year's strategic visioning, as we mentioned, Beta Zoo Trail initially came up as a priority from council in 2018, but in this year's strategic visioning, transportation safety was, they didn't really rank their choices, but it was the single overarching goal that I think was received most positively by the council. It was really the one thing that the entire council is behind, and they wanted to ensure that they put a lot of effort behind transportation safety. One of the initiatives that staff has been directed to develop out of that overarching goal is a resolution to bring back to the council, which we anticipate happening this fall, where basically the council is going to outline the fact that we are prioritizing safety, especially for bicyclists and pedestrians, and multimodal access, so access for bikes and pedestrians, over things that have historically been prioritized in our transportation network, like vehicular operations, level of service, how quickly can you get from A to B, how quickly can you get through an intersection, that kind of thing. So it's that directive from council that we are tasked as staff with prioritizing bike and pedestrian safety over other transportation priorities as we move forward. And so it's that kind of prioritization that will be taken into account as we refine this design.
A comment that I have on that is, given that that's the clear policy direction from the council and also the request of the Planning Commission to see more of that information provided prior to making a decision, I'm a bit surprised that we didn't receive more of the commission's original request for additional information on traffic safety before being requested to approve. That seems to be, we're all seeming very much on the same team and on the same page. And it seems like the things that the Planning Commission was requesting, accommodations for bikes and peds at some of these intersections and, safe routes on some of these streets, seem to be completely in line with what the council is hoping for. And I'm assuming that staff would err on the side of caution when running the models and doing the studies. So I guess a specific question is, some members of the public have requested pedestrian hybrid beacons, for example, let's say on Myrtle Avenue. What would be the process for determining whether or not it was warranted? What would be the assumptions going into the model? What would be sort of the places in which staff would have some ability to make judgment calls, and how would we know that you're taking the most conservative tack to provide the most safety in those scenarios? And what would be the likelihood of getting a pedestrian hybrid beacon at Myrtle Avenue, as a very specific question?
I would say you had a lot in there. But I would say that the outside of, like I described, trying to, taking these on a case-by-case basis and looking at exactly what the traffic flow patterns are, the speeds, the geometry of the roadway, like we always do, and looking at the potential for something like a pedestrian acted beacon. Those are definitely things that are still on the table and need to be evaluated, though. And without going through that evaluation process, I wouldn't want to say, that what are the chances of that happening? I wouldn't want to say that. I do think that we will look at that, and those are things that we'll take into consideration. Have we run the models, as you said, to look at it? Have we done the calculations? Have we done that evaluation? We have not done that yet, and I think that that's something that can be done. We need to kind of look at where we get with a number of things in order to, I think, to get to that point, though. And whether or not that is, it clearly safety is the utmost concern. And when Brian mentioned that council has made that their priority and what they're pushing down to us, we're 100% in support of it. And, we're behind trying to, make those changes. We'd like to think that we're trying to do that already. But I think it's important to make that statement and make that something that's, very well publicized, because it is important. And it is something that we have in the city of Eureka that needs to be addressed as far as injuries and fatalities, because it has been a problem. And so we will continue to work on that. I know that probably isn't the answer you're looking for. I don't know exactly what you want me to say, yes or no, but that we will definitely be looking at that.
I guess the only remaining question, Jesse, is how exactly will the model be run? How will you input a projection for the number of users of the trail?
That's a good question. And we've been developing, not developing is the wrong word. We have been a part of having counters installed, and we should have a counter installed on the Eureka side of the Eureka Waterfront Trail near the Y Street crossing, where the trail comes on the other side of the bridge. And then we also have some, so that's part of the equation. We'd have, that traffic that would be coming from the waterfront trail and coming around through that area into there. And then also traffic coming from the Humboldt Bay side, which we can project in that case. And we would have to start looking at, how many percentage we think are going to go this direction or that in order to come up with a number from that side, as well as looking at what's the potential for traffic use coming down the hill. And these are things that are very difficult to get at because, how many people are biking when it's kind of the chicken before the egg. We did the same thing with the waterfront trail. It's like, well, how many people are going to use it? We think a lot of people are going to use it, but you don't have any use patterns out there in order to identify what those numbers are. Luckily, with the waterfront trail, we have some numbers, but it's not perfect. But we are working on getting additional counts. We'll be working on getting counts throughout the corridor, bike and pedestrian, especially up in the Dolbeer and W Street area, to get a better handle on what those counts look like now. And hopefully we do see increases in those numbers, but it's difficult to really finalize what those numbers are, because you're talking about a long linear corridor that taps into a lot of different areas of the street, and there hopefully, I mean, you'd see a lot of use uptick there with bikes and pedestrians, but we don't know exactly what that'll be. So we'll do our best to try to estimate that, to look at what kind of volumes we have expecting going in those intersections.
These all have been some really good questions and comments. Commissioners, do you have anything else? And just before we open it up to public comment, like I have some few things I would like to dig into, but I figured I'd wait until just to see if anyone's here to speak tonight. So first, commissioners, anything else? And then maybe we should open it up if there are people here to speak, so then we can come back and I'm sure get into this a little bit deeper.
I just have one more question. Thanks, Chair. So this will, to me, I think, settle sort of the question I have in my mind as far as the flexibility. We hear the 30% number a lot. We hear that this is, sort of trying to get, a concept that will work within and will have flexibility to pivot if necessary on various elements. So this would be, to me, a way of understanding how much flexibility. So let's say that at McFarland Street, it warrants a signal. Now, I know that's expensive and not necessarily practical, but let's say that that was the only way that you could justify putting people across that street. I had a burrito the other day, and I can tell you that it's not real easy to get from the Shell station to the other side of the street. And it can be difficult at times of the day when you would expect traffic volumes and flow to be fairly moderate. So let's just say that was the case. Do you believe that with what we approved tonight under our environmental document that we're being considered to adopt, that could be implemented as part of this project, and you'd have the flexibility to pursue that? Would that be possible?
I think that flexibility, probably is there. In looking at the environmental document, if you wanted to increase it just a bit, I don't even think it would take any work to the resolution, but it would simply be adding a phrase to the project description in section 3.4.1. You could say something like, and elements like pedestrian activated solar powered rectangular rapid flashing beacons, and there's a typo in there, but I think because that would encompass everything. It would encompass the rapid flashing beacons, potentially the pedestrian hybrid beacon. But my concern with specifically referencing something like the pedestrian hybrid beacon is just what you brought up, Commissioner Lazar, is what if a signal is warranted, or what if a signal is warranted without the trail, and something is constructed there ahead of time. I wouldn't want to constrain us going forward. So I think that increasing the flexibility in the document in that section might be good, but it would be a very simple fix.
Thank you. That's good enough for right now. Thanks.
Anybody else before we open it up to any public speakers? Great. Staff, do we have anyone here who wanted to speak tonight?
We do. We have 6 persons who called in, and our senior administrative assistant, Raylene Gannon, will contact them and get them ready to provide their comments to you for 3 minutes.
Great. Yeah. And we're going to hold to 3 minutes. So anyone who's listening, we're going to keep it consistent and across the board.
Okay, so I have Dean Carrier on the line, and I will connect him right now. Go ahead, Dean. Are you there?
Hey, Dean, can you hear us?
Oh, there we go. Hold on a second, Dean. Let me get you connected. It didn't work. Hold on. Okay, try again.
Okay, am I connected? Okay, yeah, thank you for the opportunity to provide my input. I've already submitted quite a bit of input on the negative deck document, but just to shortly review, I am a environmental scientist with over 55 years of experience that I have spent most of my time doing secret NEPA documents or everything. This is definitely a project that is a solution. Is a solution seeking a problem. It looks like it was devised in-house, and then everything was developed to make sure that it sounded really good. I appreciate, especially enjoy the fact that people are in the Bay Area are going to go uphill 1.5 miles to go to their doctor's offices, walking or on their bikes. But my primary concern right now is they show a leg that goes into Hayes Street, dead ends there. They show no bridge going across McFarland Creek. They ignore the fact that people would be coming that way, whether there's a need or not for it. And they need to develop that to why they are mention that and why they have ignored dealing with it. I assume it's because they don't want to rile the people down here at 3 dead-end streets that they're going to push a bunch of people down there, but I have no idea. The document is really lacking a lot. Two days field studies that in an area that is really a highly biological unique area is just unbelievable. So anyway, I appreciate the opportunity, but this project really should be dead on arrival. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean, for speaking.
I have no idea.
We'll work on getting our next speaker ready.
Hi, Colin. This is Raylene with the Planning Department, and I have the commission available for you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, hello. This is Colin Fisk with the Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities. I want to, first of all, just say, as I've said many times before, we do strongly support this project and appreciate all of the effort that's gone into it. And I also appreciate the effort that staff has made to address some of the safety concerns. That said, of course, we do have some remaining concerns. You heard staff say basically that the issues around bike safety and pedestrian safety that we've raised are basically design issues and not secret issues. And I guess we just disagree with that. You don't need to have more detailed design to know that the project will result in a lot more bicyclists, and including less experienced bicyclists on these streets, which most bicyclists currently avoid. And so I think the project documents have to make it clear that the facilities will be designed to be safe for large numbers of bicyclists and for bicyclists of all types and experience levels in order to avoid an impact under the geometric design or incompatible uses questions on the CEQA checklist. And the same can be said for pedestrian crossings of the busy streets. And to be frank, ensuring that kind of safety really means going above and beyond standard street design practices. It's not going to be achieved by the standard warrant process because, as was hinted at earlier, the numbers and types of users will in part depend depend on how the project is designed and not the other way around. I think really at the core of this is that elements like sidewalks and sharrows don't make a trail. You know, the part of this project that is a real trail, I'm very happy with, but things like sidewalks and sharrows are the most basic provisions to be provided for people walking and biking that can be added to streets that are otherwise designed for vehicles. So if this kind of on-street design is going to be continued, I would suggest, frankly, that you change the name of the project to something like the Bay to Hospital Trail to avoid misleading the public about the nature of the facilities past that point. So anyway, in short, I encourage you to address these issues prior to approving the CEQA documents. I think that they are CEQA issues that can be addressed without more detailed design. And if you don't feel comfortable modifying the CEQA documents, then I would encourage you to include at least recommendations on the issues in your motion in addition to approving the documents. Thank you.
Thank you, John, very much.
Okay. Hi, Commissioners. I have Elaine Astor available now to set B.
Thank you, Raylene.
Hi, thank you for listening to my comments this evening. I have commented previously on this trail project, and now I'm going to be more specific about things I have already said, where I believe that there are, I am, as Colin Fisk is, and CRTP is, I'm wholly in favor of this trail, and I find myself in the strange position of asking the Commission to not approve the ISMND tonight and to send it back to staff for additional changes. So the sections of the CEQA document and the inaccuracies that I'm going to talk about are in section 9.8, greenhouse gas emissions, and 9.17, transportation impacts. So let's start with 9.8, and I will say that I'm glad to hear some of the safety concerns and the focus go to the area around W and Dolbear and Hemlock Streets. And so I'm going to focus now on what I think is still in the plan, which is in up to 40 parking lots in the middle of the trail off of Myrtle Avenue. So let's talk about greenhouse gas emissions from a parking lot, whether it's 20 spots or 40 spots in this short urban trail in the middle. On page 936, the document states, project operations and maintenance would generate less than 1 additional traffic trip per week on average. And I want to talk about what happens when you put the parking lot off a major arterial like Myrtle Avenue. Now, in section 9.8, item B, the question is, does this conflict with an applicable plan, policy, or regulation that is adopted for the purpose of reducing emissions on greenhouse gases? Well, it turns out that putting a parking lot off of Myrtle Avenue and increasing traffic off of Myrtle Avenue, more than 1 trip per week, I would say, so that's an inaccuracy, is more than a less than significant impact. And the reason for that is Myrtle Avenue is defined as a bike route, and it's defined in the Humboldt Regional Bicycle Plan as a major bike route. And so it would decrease safety, and it would discourage bicyclists from using Myrtle Avenue for trips of any kind, recreation or transportation. And that would result in more greenhouse gas emissions, along with the Eureka residents who will drive to the parking lot in order to launch on this short urban trail. So those are inaccuracies in the document itself, and I would ask that those be corrected.
The 3 minutes are up.
Thank you, Elaine, for your comment. We appreciate it very much.
Yes, commissioners, I have Rachel Smith on the line now.
Appreciate it very much.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Hi. My ultimate goal in speaking is to request that the commissioners not approve the ISMND. Problems raised in prior meetings are egregious and have not been rectified. The grant application to the CCC that paid for this study made many false claims. The ISMND does not take into account any effects on adjacent landowners or rights-of-way holders, and no landowners have been brought into the planning process. The specific look, oh Jesus.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi. My ultimate goal is
Yeah, we can hear you, but there is some feedback, Rachel.
not approve the ISMND.
Do I just keep going?
I think so. I'm not actually really sure. It sounds like it's just looping back what you already said to us. Is it possible to start this call over again for Rachel Smith so she can finish her comments? I just don't know, because about that feedback, I don't know if that's going to fix itself or what.
Should I just continue?
Yeah, go ahead, Rachel. Just continue. Sorry for the feedback.
The location of the trail and the width of the trail easement are unknown. Sensitive lands.
Then how do we hear?
Rachel, I think what may be happening is that if you're playing the live stream from Granicus in the background, the audio from that is what we're hearing. So maybe if you turned off the audio from your computer or whatever's turned on, I think everyone can hear your comments just fine.
Okay, should I just continue now?
Yeah, were you able to turn off or turn down your computer so it's not playing feedback?
I moved away from it.
Okay, yeah. So we can hear you loud and clear as long as it's not coming in the background. So
Just tell me when to start.
go ahead.
The specific location of the trail and the width of the trail easement are unknown. Sensitive lands would be filled, bulldozed, and paved, completely, can you turn that off? Completely annihilating them. Steep hillsides will be held together, not with native plants, but with riprap. Year-round springs will divert into culverts and erode the land beneath instead of nurturing them before spilling into the creek and filling it with silt. Special interest groups who have never stepped foot on the proposed alignment and are completely ignorant of the plans, nevertheless sing their praises and condescend to landowners and tell us we are afraid. The only thing I am afraid of is losing some of the last salmon habitat in Eureka. I'm afraid of seeing yet another redwood grove disappear. I'm afraid of having our native frogs and foxes and deer and all the other creatures that make their homes in this small woodland lose their habitat. I'm afraid of putting the final nail in the coffin of McFarland Creek. I don't see how, in good conscience, the commissioners could approve this ISMND and allow this project to proceed as is. Destroying wetlands and contributing to the extinction of native plants and animals is not the way to fix our problems with pedestrian and bicycle safety. Imagine what kinds of pedestrian and bicycle improvements could be made on our city streets for the many millions of dollars this project requires. The city is asking the Planning Commission to rubber stamp a nebulous plan. The commission should not feel comfortable voting for this, hoping that somewhere else along the line, some other body will fix all that is wrong with this project. I greatly appreciate the amount of time and energy the Planning Commission has allowed for deciding this matter, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Rachel Smith.
Commissioners, I have a Sam Harris available now. Go ahead, Sam.
Hello, this is Sam Norris. I want to thank you guys for allowing me to speak, and I request the commission not to approve this ISMD. One, seems everyone but the actual property owners and adjoining property owners who this will be affected the rest of their lives are in favor of this trail. Number two, the guy was talking earlier about to reach out to property owners. No one I know around here has ever been contacted by the city about this. Three, in some of the statements, they talk about less than significant impact. They have light noise, and during the quiet time with dark, right now, this is a very quiet community. Lots of wildlife, all that, very dark and nice. Now, if the trail goes through, there's going to be huge amounts of light and sound noise. Number four, it talks about there's no impact stated with efficient wildlife. I disagree with this statement, and also anyone that actually lives here also disagrees with it too. They did the study between, looks like May and August of 2020. A few different times that people walk in there in Fargo Creek, and we have salmon spawning, steelhead, there's eels, salamanders, frogs. We have deer that are tame deer that are daily walking around. All this activity is going to be huge disturbing for all the wildlife. And then also they talk about the safe route to school, which is you got to bring in all the criminal element that's going to go right by this middle school here. So that's also another problem, but that's not about the wildlife issue. And so that's basically just what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I have Craig Benson available right now. Go ahead, Mr. Benson.
Commission, you have heard me speak 3 times now about my family's passionate support for the Beta Zoo Trail through our property, as well as our heartbreak at the inadequacy of the MSD that is indeed creating a dead-on arrival response from property owners. And also, after listening to 3 rounds of public testimony, my family is now asking you not to adopt the ISMD for the following 5 reasons. The first is that the Beta Zoo Trail is unlike any other trails built in the city of Eureka, in that the majority of the land in the APE is privately owned, and the quality of the habitat being traversed is very high, not industrial brownfields, and the level of public concern is crushingly high, and the outreach to the landowners in the APE has been dismally inadequate, so much that the city doesn't honestly know if they even have a viable project in which to spend more money chasing grants. And a revised ISMND or an upgrade to an EIR is needed for a project of this size. Number 2, despite what you're hearing, the ISMND is being presented to you ahead of the level of planning that's typically associated with regional trails. It's indeed the cart before the horse. Your approval of the ISMND would show the city favoritism not afforded to other trail planning entities. For example, the trail alignment has not been sufficiently defined, nor has the hydrologic character been adequately defined. The Blue Line stream courses are not located and placed on all segments of the map.
nor have the trees in the 8 been surveyed. So this is a short list of the inadequacies, but by not having an actual trail alignment, not having water courses mapped, not having trees surveyed, the main purpose of the document, which is to assess the environmental impacts of the proposed trail, are completely invalidated. And then the typical trail drawings later shown to the commission by city staff were a start of being able to make this evaluation, but they're not included in this ISMND. And so you're getting smoke and mirrors. Number 3, the city staff has said that the environmental impacts will be assessed at the time of permit acquisition. But at the minimum, for an ISMND to be adopted, it must at least describe the methods that will be used to assess the impact mitigation. And other than very generalized avoidance measures and construction BMPs, the ISMND does not provide mitigation ratios for trees to be removed in the trail right of way. Moreover, the National Wetland Inventory mapping used to map wetlands doesn't adequately evaluate seasonal inundation in forested wetlands present in really high volumes in segments 2 through 4 of the trail. And the one mitigation ratio in the ISMND for wetland impacts is set at a 1-to-1 ratio, when 3-to-1 is the standard compensatory ratio for high quality wetlands. And the Hixari Trail on the Eureka waterfront had a final wetland mitigation ratio greater than 5-to-1. Number 4, there are forestry, agricultural, cultural, and recreational activities.
Excuse me, the 3 minutes are up.
Sorry, Mr. Benson. We don't mean to cut you off, but in all fairness, 3 minutes for everyone. Thank you for your comments tonight.
Yep.
Was that the last speaker, Raylene?
That was the last speaker.
Okay. Well, turning it back over to the commission, I do want to thank everyone who's been speaking on this project, people who keep continually to come to the meetings or to the Zoom meetings, to express their opinions and put forth their thoughts on this. It's been a while since I've seen so many people engaged in one project. So I just want to thank everybody. Also want to thank staff and, everyone's hard work on this project. And I've been kind of silent, so the other people have had their comments. So I just want to kick us off with this. Where I struggle in my decision on this is that I understand where we are as far as like wanting to get funding and trying to figure that out to have a path forward. But it's really hard to put your faith or your name behind something when it's not clearly defined. And a lot of us, all of us, are having to make decisions on this commission for clearly defined rules, things that are clearly outlined so we can make the best judgment forward. And I believe staff has the best intentions forward, but it's a check and balance thing for me. And I struggle because it is so loose. And I feel that there's a lot of conjecture and there aren't a lot of definitives, that again, like people have said, the trail isn't clearly defined. There's a lot of buy-in that goes for it. There are, it seems to me, some gaps and some holes as far as considering elements of where the trail, is going to go. What does that mean as far as construction build-outs and stuff? And then us not having, or us or whoever's on the commission at that time where it goes through, not having a say as to the things that I think do or should fall under CEQA. So that's just a comment, and I'll open the floor to anyone else who has anything for staff. Are there any other comments or questions for staff? Or hopefully you guys can still hear me.
I could hear you, and I appreciated your comments, Chair. I guess I just want to take a second to speak to some of the commenters' concerns regarding biological impacts, which, are legitimate. It's clearly a sensitive habitat. And we want to preserve and hopefully enhance, the habitat that's there. If you've listened into the whole meeting, you've seen, some of the commissioners raking staff over the coals over safety, and that's nothing compared to what staff on the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Army Corps of Engineers and the Coastal Commission, what they're going to do. So this really is the beginning and not the end. And there will be a lot of other opportunities for natural resource agencies where that is literally their entire job, is to protect these resources to further mitigate the project as they see fit. So that is, I think, an important thing to keep in mind, and helps me be comfortable with those elements of the proposed project. So I did want to say that, and I have some other, thoughts about some hopefully low-hanging fruit ways to refine some of the safety concerns. I do like the idea of maybe including recommendations, if not modifying the document. But I'll wait to dig into that until I hear from the other commissioners.
Thank you, Commissioner Freitas. Anyone else?
I'll just say I echo Commissioner Arriaga's concerns just about some of the unknowns, and certainly Commissioner Freitas with the safety. I feel like there are a lot of issues surrounding communication to landowners. There are a lot of unknowns about, again, with the trail alignment, whether or not those are going through owned properties or this is city property. And at this point, I'm not entirely sure I'm fully clear as to what piece of this we're actually voting on. We've talked about safety, we're talking about environmental issues, we're talking about transportations, we're talking about greenhouse emissions. And so, and I am not fully confident that this is the right steps, and kind of stating what Mr. Benson said was about the cart before the horse, and I kind of feel that way too. And I'm not sure that that's fully been laid out for us, or at least perhaps I'm not a believer of how it's been laid out. So I do have some deep concerns that we're kind of being set up a little bit to vote on something that maybe isn't quite all the way there and not all the way clear. So I look forward to maybe ironing some of that out tonight and trying to get some answers for that.
Thank you, Commissioner Mayer. Commissioner Lazar, do you have anything?
I'm struggling, similar to my fellow commissioners. It's an uncomfortable position we find ourselves in with respect to, we're scant on details that are, real concern, whether it be safety related things and being asked to put our trust in, the design coming through in a safe fashion. I share Commissioner Freitas's attitude about the biological impacts to a large extent. This will not be the end of the discussion when it comes to permitting through Cal Fish and Wildlife, Army Corps, Coastal Commission. I would offer on the biological front that these are not pristine areas. They've been allowed to recover through the lack of development that's come, but they have been historically quite disturbed. The gulches and greenways have been the subjects of historical fill, encroachment and what we have is not pristine remnants of what hasn't been touched. All of these areas have been touched, whether from brickyards or railroads. There's a lot of history there. So it's a balancing act, and I think we heard from staff that we're looking at these places because they're the last lands available that are not occupied and make for a possible alignment. To that end, I'd love to see a reapportionment of portions of the city's transportation network, but we're not there, and that's not the project we have before us today. So I'm a little uncomfortable with the lack of specificity. I'd be interested in hearing what the other commissioners' attitudes are about moving forward with a somewhat vague understanding of certain details, because that's, to me, the central question that I think faces us if we're to take action tonight.
I guess, yeah, to follow up on that, the question would be, what are the specific elements of the project as proposed that the commission is looking for more detail on? I'm definitely on team traffic safety, obviously, but are there other elements of the proposed project that certain commissioners have specific focus on that they're hoping to see more information provided?
Well, I'm on team traffic and safety as well. For we're choosing teams over here. And I know it's in everyone's best interest, but again, it's in full transparency, it's like when you join a commission or something, like I never really thought how deeply it would affect me, and like these things really do weigh on me in the sense of like green lighting something that will be a future project and be like, I had a hand in that, and it's not up to par, or it is up to par, or we didn't think about it thoroughly, or it just wasn't completely fulfilled at the time. And again, like I feel like it could follow under these guidelines, but those are still really loose guidelines. So I would like to see something more materialized in that way as best as possible, instead of it being so vague. And I mean, I'm just being very truthful. Yeah, it's uncomfortable to give a blessing on something, where there just seems a lot of resistance from, other stakeholders like landowners, and a project trail that isn't clearly defined. I mean, we have a general area, and again, like I don't really know how to solve these issues, but yeah, I think this has been probably one of the harder things to discuss and pick through in my time on the commission. I'm, just being really honest about it. So. And I don't know, I guess it kind of feels like we're at an impasse here. So I would like to ask staff now, after hearing what we have to say to it, what are your thoughts? I think you can kind of feel the sentiment across like the commissioners, and I would just like to, let's problem solve. Let's figure it out.
Right. Well, thank you. Staff understands the comments and the concerns, and a lot of the concerns that you are expressing are the same ones that we have as far as like what comes next with the design. It'll be complicated to figure out these things. We've already agonized over them. In particular, the transition from the dedicated class 1 trail to what comes at the south end. It's a very difficult area. We looked at a lot of different options through there, and none of them are ideal. So it's about balancing, the opportunities that you have with the challenges that come with them, the benefits of each of those opportunities. And all I can say is that we will continue working on those. I think that taking some of the specificity out of, for instance, the class 3 language that's referenced in the project description and in the resolution actually is a positive thing. And that's why staff is recommending it tonight. If the commission is inclined to include additional recommendations in its motion, we're open to that. And we can talk, we're happy to talk about what those recommendations might include. But I think that you've heard from staff that transportation safety, particularly for the bikes and pedestrians that we're trying to accommodate with this facility, is really at the top of our list when it comes to the things that we take into consideration. Now, all that being said, I do think that it's unwise and premature to include too many specifics in this document about what is this particular segment going to include, what particular features will be in this segment, what particular features will be in that in this segment, because I think that it constrains us, and there may be there are other things that we need to analyze as we go forward, and funding sources may change the picture. If there's a funding source that comes up that prioritizes, for instance, a separated facility for bikes, maybe there's a way to achieve that, but it would take a lot of dollars that the previous funding options haven't really included. So we're open to talking for sure, and happy to include recommendations about transportation safety elements that could be included if the commission is so inclined.
I just have a for staff a clarity question, and in projects that are contentious or that are just really challenging. I know this one, isn't supposed to come back to the planning commission at all. Is there any special exemptions, or has there ever been precedent where that can happen? Like, say things become more solidified, say this gets passed through motions as is, but there's like an exemption that it has to come back, when design is like more solidified, or there's other aspects more solidified. Is that something that has happened before or is possible here? Because, I keep hearing that everyone's so, it's hard, and myself included, hard to like vote on things that you're not really sure of. So say you guys get funding and say these things get solidified, and then there's another, picture drawn, a more clear picture. At that point, then can that go back to a planning commission for discussion?
I would want Principal Planner Getz to also chime in. My response would be that we understand that things are controversial. We understand that the commission has to make difficult decisions, and one of the reasons why the council has directed staff to come up with the resolution that I spoke about earlier, prioritizing transportation safety, prioritizing access and safety for bikes and pedestrians, is so that when making controversial or difficult decisions, bodies like the Planning Commission and future city councils can point to that resolution saying, no, we outlined what our priority is. So we don't have to have the level of discussion every time a controversial trail project or a controversial on-street bike or pedestrian facility comes up as an idea in the future. And Kristen, if you could weigh in on future processes with the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Director Kirby. I think if the commission wanted to ask that a report come back to them in the future when things are further solidified, we could certainly make that happen for you whenever that time is appropriate.
And Kristen, is that just like a reading report? Is that something that we can dive into and make decisions on if there's things that seem inconsistent with the scope of the Planning Commission?
It would not be something that would be before you for a decision. It would not be a discretionary review. It would be a report, but you could certainly take public comment on it if you chose to, and you could certainly provide comments that would be relayed back to public works staff and designers, developers, that kind of thing.
And also to the city council. I mean, the decision to ultimately construct this project will lie with the city council, and that will come when we accept grant funds. It will come when we award a contract for construction. When we obviously there, as Commissioners Freitas and Lazar have mentioned, there are future processes with permitting agencies when different elements of the project will be taken into consideration. But I think it's important to remember why we're here tonight, and that is this environmental document substantial enough? Does it adequately describe the potential impacts of the project and their mitigations? And staff believes that it does.
And Madam Chair, if I could also just add a reminder that the use permit will come back to the Planning Commission for the first section of the trail, the portion that's within the coastal zone, because a use permit will be required for that to go forward. So you can certainly do a deep dive on that one. It will be a discretionary review by you and a discretionary action when you do take one. And we can certainly provide any updates at that point in time on the remainder of the trail sections too.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Kristen. I appreciate that.
So I think I heard Public Works Director Gerving say that we could potentially make minor modifications to the project description. I think you gave the example of section 3.4.1 and still adopt it tonight. Did I understand that correctly? Or would that be some sort of violation of noticing?
I want confirmation from Principal Planner Getz, but when we discussed, when we discussed this earlier, we were talking about some of these minor modifications, like the change of bike facility versus Class 3 bikeway, and at least that change, staff's opinion is that it's a minor immaterial amendment to what was noticed, and the noticing has been robust throughout this process, and we're still consistent with it.
And I would agree with Director Gerving as long as the recommendations or proposed modifications that might come from the Planning Commission can still remain within the general parameters of the existing project, then I think that we're going to be okay.
And one other really specific question for someone. In this section of the project description, it talks about pedestrian activated rectangular rapid flash beacons. What is the difference between that and pedestrian hybrid beacons, if any? Are those the same things or are they slightly different?
Yeah, hey, this is Scott. So pedestrian hybrid beacon is a little bit different than a pedestrian, a rapid flashing beacon. A pedestrian hybrid beacon, which is typically called a hawk, will have red light associated with it, along with some other things, but they will stop traffic with a red light opposed to a rapid flashing beacon, which is a cautionary in orange or a yellow type flashing.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments, commissioners?
Yeah, so just in the interest of trying to kind of tackle this, I'm going to offer the way I'm looking at it, and maybe this will be helpful, maybe it won't, but it seems like from the safety standpoint, if we were to break out the discussion so far, speak in the most general terms, we have the matter surrounding crossings at Myrtle, Booner, and Harris, and the way of most safely dealing with those. And then we have the on-street segments on Dolbeer, on W Street, any portions of the trail that are not class 1, I guess, maybe is a better way of putting it. And then there's the matter of the parking lot. Those are the things that, to me, outside of biological, seem to be the primary things we've been discussing. But I would look to my fellow commissioners to see if that is a too simplistic summary or too broad.
For me, I think there are some things on that list, specifically the parking lot, that I'm not that concerned about. So it encompasses my concerns and then some.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that list?
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo Commissioner Freitas on that. But again, I just keep going back to what's the task at hand tonight, what we're being asked to do in our purview tonight, and just based on all the information that we have, to move forward in any way, shape, or possible. So.
So, I've been struggling to try to think of a way to include in our motion and resolution direction on these topics. I think some of the testimony we heard from Mr. Fisk from this evening spoke about designing the on-street segments in a way that is safe for all cyclist groups. I think we have to kind of parse that because, right, like there's the pedestrian related component to the non-class 1 segments. And to the large extent, I believe there are sidewalks that exist within those streets, those rights of way. So it's really not a matter of pedestrian safety that I think the largest amount of concern that we've been talking about. It's about bicycle safety. And I think it's a very good point that we're trying to make this a usable trail for all age groups and all skill levels. And if that's the case, then it means that the safety of the facilities should take that into account and accommodate all skill levels. So that would be some of the, I think, language we could use. It's not very specific, but it does get to the heart of sort of the concern that, and also it was pointed out that the conventional warrant system would be perhaps not sensitive enough, and that there should be a different approach given to in the design. I don't know if I'm correctly describing that, but that, I guess, let's just tackle that for right now and not get into the crossings yet. But can we get some comments from staff about does the verbiage that I was going with about accommodating all cyclist skill levels and creating safety in the design to with respect to that? Does that sound like something that can be accommodated?
I think within I guess it can be accommodated in the recommendation, I think, but you have to consider, different facilities allow for, like you mentioned, different, it's rider comfort, and I'm missing the actual technical term that kind of describes exactly what it is with how, the perceived comfort that a bicyclist would have on a particular type of facility. For example,
level of stress,
level of traffic stress. There you go. Thanks, Scott. So the level of traffic stress that a bicyclist feels, can change depending on the type of facility that they're operating on. And some bicyclists are definitely more comfortable operating in higher levels of traffic stress than others. So there is, when you think about probably the lowest level of traffic stress would be like a class 1 facility, kind of what we're alluding to tonight, where you have, there's very few conflicts except for maybe like crossings and that sort of thing, or, like just bi-directional travel. Or you have maybe a class 3 where bicycles are sharing the road, typically in lower speed, lower volume streets, where, it's that, where depending on the situation be appropriate for that. And then you have class 4 separated bike lanes, which can be hard separated. They can be kind of separated by striping and that sort of thing. And all those different scenarios provide a different level of traffic stress. They also provide a different level of required right-of-way. It's one thing to have a class 3 bicycle where you can have the bicycle facilities, incorporated in distributed vehicles, definitely that's going to be your highest level of traffic stress. Then you have the separated facility where you need to have, your bicycle facility. Then you had some level of buffer between the vehicles and the bicyclists, which that can be a hard separated barrier, or it can be a painted stripes. Those need different levels of space on the roadway cross section in order to fit within that design. So those are all things that kind of have to be taken into consideration. And that's part of what we are alluding to, leaving to, like, for example, on Dolby W, those areas, leaving that a little bit open so we can do the evaluation, looking at parking, looking at volumes, looking at speed to determine what could potentially realistically fit in those areas. And that's something that, so I think what you're getting at, Commissioner Lazar, is, I think that can be included, hopefully allowing, not saying, that we need just the highest level of, protection. I mean, the highest level of protection is good, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is, it may not be possible to provide that fully separated, separated facility. It may be able to. We're not to that point yet, but I think that's something we're going to look at. And I don't know if that fully answers your question as far as the wording you're looking for, but I don't know if that gives you the context that you're asking about.
Well, I guess I'm not looking for a pre-commitment, but I do think that the wording, it's helpful to speak to the skill levels, and a level of stress is really not going to speak to skill level except for maybe a standard population. I don't know. I think we heard testimony that I certainly don't ride on W or Dolbeer streets. I wouldn't do it, and I have extensive experience, and I'm a confident cyclist, and I don't see that translating to it being feasible to do anything in the class 3 camp on those street segments, and with a straight face argue that these are safe options. And we're being asked to essentially comfort ourselves with that these remain to be seen. They'll be sorted out. The design's only 30%. Well, then let's provide some guidance in our resolution that makes it clear that your goal in designing for safety in those on-street segments is to accommodate a wide range of user groups, from the experienced cyclists down to the less experienced. And I'm not going to try to design that or script that, but and that that safety for all groups be given weight, because I don't know how else to, short of calling out a specific facility standard, like class 4, class 2, class 1. We don't want to hem you in, but we also want to be clear in our direction that those segments, with respect to that particular issue of the safety part, need to be designed, much more rigorously, I think, than what we've seen today.
So, Madam Chair, perhaps the recommendation from the Planning Commission could be something along the lines of ensure all on-street segments are designed and constructed in a way that accommodates and is safe for all cyclist groups and skill levels.
Commissioner Lazar, does that satisfy what you're trying to sum up? Okay. Anyone else have any comments to that? Or want to add additional comments of their own?
I like it. I have some additional ones. It sounds to me like this is really what we're getting down to, is refining some of these recommendations. And I think an hour in, it's a good time to reflect that we are all generally supportive and excited about this project conceptually. It sounds like to me, I don't want to speak for the other commissioners, but I'm hoping, I think I'd like to try and make a motion tonight just to see if it can pass, and if it can't, that's fine, and we can keep at it. But I have a couple of ideas to throw out about recommendations, and I'm just going to read them off. I just was writing them down, and then hopefully we can refine as a commission what ones we like and which ones we want to remove or edit. So the recommendations would be provided to council in addition to adopting the document as proposed by staff. The commission's recommendations will be provided to council in writing now, tonight or tomorrow, within 48 hours, and then prior to the granting of the RFP, so that they are fresh on their minds before they award the RFP. One would be to accommodate all user groups, as Commissioner Lazar suggested. We could also add a few other things. One would be to bring 90% or 100% designs to the Traffic Safety Committee prior to awarding the RFP. Another would be to take existing users of the trail when doing the warrant study and double it. Or, you know, something like that where we aren't just using baseline conditions as a way to determine what will be safe. And then I also just had a couple of things that would be recommendations to consider. One would be consider pedestrian hybrid beacons if it seems feasible, as opposed to the flashing beacons, which also seem like they would potentially be adequate. Consider a separated bike lane, as discussed by Commissioner Lazar. And then the final one, I have no idea how to word, but it would be essentially consider a green striped advisory bike lane or sharrow on W Street by the park, by Sequoia Park. And I don't know, I don't know how to phrase it, but it would look like this. And basically it would be, in addition to a sharrow, having a green stripe in the road to kind of beef up the sharrow and make it clear that pedestrians, or rather bikes, would have sort of the right of way on the road. Be pretty hard to ignore. So anyway, that's a total of 6 things which would satisfy my concerns. It sounds like the council is very much you know, considering these things in addition to staff. And I think if we provide this information, they will have what they need to push for it if it isn't included and they deem it to be necessary. So that's my proposal, and I can read any of that again if you'd like me to.
Thank you, Commissioner Freitas. I'll echo all of those points. To be honest, because then I feel like that satisfies a few of the things that were making me really uncomfortable, and it allows other stakeholders buy-in and eyes on this. And then obviously highlighting the things that I believe the council should be looking at or digging in deeper. So how to put that all into a pretty little motion bow, though, staff. Looking to you.
It looks like Kristen is maybe working on that as I speak, but before there's any further discussion, I just want to say that from a staff standpoint, those all sound like great ideas. The one that I would maybe amend a little bit is about specifically saying double the number of existing trail users when doing the warrant study. I would want to leave open. I think we need to look at what other methodology is out there, because this isn't a completely unprecedented, endeavor where we're looking at building a trail that will hopefully increase ridership, increase foot traffic, that kind of thing. So as long as we can, work off that existing methodology and taking into account the likelihood of an increase, yeah, absolutely.
I think one thing I would mention real quickly, and to say this goes back to Commissioner Lazar's comment on accommodate all user groups. That could, depending on how things would lay out on the street, that could mean that, we may not be able to put anything on those streets because we wouldn't be able to accommodate when you say all user groups, I think what you're trying to get at was like, even the very, the lower skilled riders, or people who would really need that, like the lowest level of traffic stress, where you'd have like a separated facility, the hard separated facility. So those are just something you'd want to consider in the recommendation, because it could be something that would just, would preclude us from including those in that section, I guess. I'm not, like I said, I'm not 100% sure that's the level that we need to get to in order to determine what we need to do. There's other things we need to look at there in order to make that determination.
Do you have suggested modifications that we could incorporate?
I think it might be as simple as saying, instead of just accommodate all user groups, you could say, analyze feasible options to accommodate all user groups. I mean, I don't know how better to say, like, we're going to do the best we can. Like, how can you put that into a bullet point? I'm not sure.
How about this? I'll offer this much. I'd be happy to excise that as a general statement when it comes to all non-class 1 segments, but not when it comes to Dolby or W Street, south of Harris. Those are extremely high volumes of traffic. I don't know the fancy word. I don't know if it's arterial or, but that is the linkage to South Eureka. It sees a huge volume of traffic, and and just during a softball game alone, you're asking for trouble. I mean, if people are using this at all times of the day. So I don't think it's appropriate to design those segments for anything less than all skill levels, not even so much user groups, because the user groups of pedestrians, I'm not worried about. It's the user groups of cyclists in those sections. Those are the most dangerous on-street segments, in my opinion.
So all skill levels of cyclists.
Yeah.
Kristen, could you modify the language that you proposed to accommodate that?
Yes.
And south of Harris, I'm happy to give you more flexibility north of it, but south of it, I don't see that as a reasonable. We're essentially being asked to support a project that doesn't have details that would provide assurances at this point. And those are major safety concerns that give me pause and but I'm less concerned about remaining segments that are on street.
And Director Gerving, in terms of the warrant numbers, I had proposed to take existing user counts and double them. How would you recommend seeing that recommendation modified?
I would say, or consider alternate methodologies recognized, alternate recognized methodologies. It could be from NACTO. There could be examples to work from out there.
I guess I would, the one thing I'm scratching my head about, and I may be missing something here, but if we heard at the beginning of tonight's presentation, we've heard it before, that this is not about connecting just the Bay Trail to the zoo. This is part of a plan for a larger network of multimodal facilities within the Eureka area. And if that is the case, then to confine our warrant analysis to short-term, a future that could result once the trail has been constructed, but not the actual future where we're envisioning this tying into cyclists traversing the Eureka city, through various other segments that are to be fleshed out, then I think we're really kind of missing our ultimate, this is envisioned to be something greater than just a trail that connects people between the Bay and the zoo. And if so, then applying a methodology that takes that into account and designs for that future is more appropriate to me than anything that would be about taking existing traffic on the Bay Trail that is in its infancy and doubling or tripling or quadrupling. That just, to me, is not an effective methodology. Am I missing something, or does that make sense as far as and that would be the alternatives you were speaking about, Director Bergman, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I do think it's important that, the city engineer who's, sitting over here on the right-hand side of my screen, it's his stamp that ends up on the warrant study. And so then he's got to be comfortable, in his professional opinion, is everything that he knows about traffic and transportation safety and all of that, and the methodology that's given, he's got to be the one who's comfortable with that when he puts a stamp on it and he signs it. And so I think that looking at other methodologies that are out there would be an important option to give staff.
Yeah, I like the idea of sort of including both parts to this recommendation, both either deferring to other recognized methodologies or, you know, doubling the existing users, just to kind of clarify what the intent is. The intent is to take something that's over existing users and anticipate a future in which there are more users of this trail and it is a more connected system. And I'm not really tied to the particular language of it. And it might be, you know, explore recognized methodologies to project anticipated users into the future beyond existing conditions, or something to that effect. It is really hard to come up with these things on the spot. Thoughts from others?
Well, I feel like, you know, I mean, this is progress. I feel like we are definitely progressing. And so that is a positive thing. And I think it's addressing, I feel like, you know, as we see the motion, as it gets closer, we'll see if it's addressing everybody's concerns and tweak it from there. It's almost kind of easier to see it when it's all cohesive, I think. And not to put you on the spot, Kristen, but I agree with that. And yeah, it's feeling better than it did. So that's just my thoughts and comments.
Kristen, to clarify, are you drafting a motion on your computer that you could share on your screen with the commission?
I am. I was just waiting for whether or not there were any additional recommendations.
I guess it just as far as the warrant stuff, maybe as a way of kind of summarizing my feeling on it would just be that that in evaluating user traffic on the trail, that it take into account projected increases in the future, and maybe the only other thing I think to point to is targets for carving off people that are currently driving vehicles and reallocating those user groups to multimodal networks. So reallocating existing user groups that are a known population. We know how many people drive cars in the city on a regular basis and the traffic that's associated with that. Taking that population as part of that projected future use, and whatever those targets are in terms of our active transportation planning, those types of things should be what we use to design or to consider, you know, whether these warrant, you know, in this warrant study. So something along those lines. Does that make sense? Can that be boiled down?
Take that big sentence and make it small. Well, I should wait to see if Kristen has a thought on that.
I can't type and talk at the same time.
That was my favorite sentence of the night, Kristen.
Were there any other recommendations that we wanted to consider adding before I share this?
I haven't heard from Commissioner Mayer in a while.
Honestly, this project is taken a lot of, for me, it's outside of what I know professionally. I was a biology major for a while, and so I'm grateful for that to read through. But I do think a lot of the issues with the biological stuff, I think that we've already stated that are going to be addressed later. But I do want to just say, just for the record, and I think it's outside the scope of the council or commission, I'm sorry, that I have a lot of concerns because this has come up, and especially on this project, that there has to be some increase of public outreach. And I'm not too sure where the breakdown is, but the continual claims that these property owners have not been contacted is concerning to me, not only for the commission and for this project, but as a resident of Eureka who also lives on a green belt that I could easily foresee, because I'm very close to the park, you know, it's starting to come this way, and I'd like to know as a resident. And so I just wanted just to say that out loud. And I think the claims of inadequacy on the report haven't been proven to us, and I don't think it's within our scope to figure that out. And so I appreciate your guys' professional, especially Commissioner Freitas and Lazar, that this is your profession and you've enlightened me. And so I feel like it was a good learning opportunity for me to learn a lot of things that I wasn't quite sure. I had to look up a lot of stuff when I read through that report originally. But I did just want to say for the record that I think some of that outreach needs to be figured out. I think you guys are going to have, it sounds to me like, a real fight on your hands with these residences. And I wish you luck, because I'd like to see this project continue. But I appreciate you guys working through the safety issues, which seem very much within our scope. And I appreciate you taking them so seriously. And I think that all the recommendations you made tonight are right on. So great job. And thanks for letting me absorb it all.
Yeah, I guess one thought that I've been having, kind of to echo that, is like, this is a really challenging space for collaboration, and we're really trying hard to make it work anyway. But I don't believe there has been a lot of, you know, charrette type, design type work to date. I do know that there was a public meeting on this project, I believe during the circulation period, because I attended it. But you know, I think that people are asking for more of an opportunity to help design the project that they just didn't have. So I think that, you know, was a lesson learned. And maybe, you know, for the next segment that goes in, we'll have more of an opportunity to give feedback on the front end, as opposed to waiting until the project description is supposed to be finalized and then having to have, you know, these types of conversations for 4 meetings.
So are we ready to take a look at Kristen's? All right.
One thing I would say is, in that first part where it says, "and adopting the following recommendations," I would add to be provided to the city council in writing within 48 hours of this action, and again 48 hours in advance of the public hearing to award the RFP for the project construction.
And Commissioner Freitas, are you just asking that we email these to them, or how would you?
Yeah, in writing by email. I don't think it needs to be printed. And yeah, I guess feel free to put it in track changes or something until the rest of the commission approves it, or leave it as is. I'm just throwing things out there. They don't have to be set in stone. I think what I meant was including to be provided to the city council within 48 hours of this action, and again 48 hours in advance of the public hearing to award the RFP.
I'm sorry, providing the comment or the recommendations to the city council before the RFP.
Yeah, within 48 hours of the public hearing to award the RFP. So it wouldn't need to go in like the bid documents.
Couldn't it just be provided with the packet at any meeting where the RFP is considered?
Yeah, or yeah, maybe that would make more sense. So it's not like set your clock for 48 hours in advance of the hearing. Yeah, you could just put it in the body of the discussion for the staff report for the award. But what if the award's on consent? And then I guess it still has a staff report, but it doesn't have a hearing.
I guess, Kristen, I was willing to say with the part one of the revised motion, I think we can say either all on-street segments south of Harris. No.
And the only other thing I would suggest is for number 4, to clarify at the crossings of Myrtle and Boone. I don't know if we really need to include Harris in that, but we could, I guess. But apart from that, I think this reads to the intent of my recommendations. Thank you, Kristen.
I guess we didn't really talk about the parking lot, and I wasn't hearing a lot of discussion amongst the other commissioners. At a prior meeting, I suggested there being some consideration not built into the design, but to be considering that the parking lot be any parking facilities. Well, there's only one parking facility. Suggesting that the parking lot be wired for electric vehicles. You know, at least just set up to allow for electric vehicles, not a retrofit kind of scenario. So if we are going to go with the parking lot, I'd be interested in if the commission would be willing to include that in our revised motion and recommendations.
Well, I think, I mean, I have a couple thoughts. It wouldn't hurt. We're already this deep. And it might address one of the comments about greenhouse gases. That being said, I believe the parking lot is in the coastal zone, and we will have an opportunity to actually guide the design of that, as opposed to just providing a recommendation. So it's, to me, it's kind of 6 of one, dozen of the other.
That's a good point. I kind of forgot about that for a minute. So
Commissioner Freitas is correct that the parking lot would be within the coastal zone and would go back to you at the time that the use permit comes back.
I would offer that the MND is for all project segments, and that is the action we're taking tonight.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm fine with including it. That is 100% fine by me personally. I don't know about the rest of the commissioners.
Oh, like you said, we're already that deep. So let's just go for the gold here, team. Because again, there's going to be other bodies, you know, looking at this, and other, you know, stakeholders looking at this. And so they can at least see big bullet points of concerns and things, and then go from there in their purviews and scopes.
If we're talking specifically about that parking lot, I do think it needs to be closed at night, which has been a real concern for the neighbors. So I don't know if we want to include that or if we'll cross that when it comes back.
We could just add and a security gate to be closed at dusk each day. That's how they do it for most parks if they have a gate. I feel like we're a little bit like Oprah right now, where it's like a recommendation for you and a recommendation for you, recommendation for everyone.
I mean, this is a beast of a project, and I am excited by it, but there's a lot to flesh out, and so I appreciate everyone really digging into this and offering a path forward, because these things are challenging. So between Commissioner Freitas, Lazar, and Mayor, how is this revised motion looking now?
I feel really good about it.
I appreciate the changes, and Kristen, thanks for. I guess number 3, I have some thoughts on. I'm going to try to maybe Commissioner Mayer can speak, and I'll see if I can figure out a way to tweak it.
Any other comments from you, Commissioner Mayer? Are you feeling solid with this? Or comfortable with this, I should say.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
The focus here.
So Commissioner Lazar, you were saying you had some comments on item number 3?
Yeah, I think I'd like to see something. The last part of the sentence is talking about appropriate alternate recognized methodologies to account for projected increases in the future for modeling. I think what I'm trying to get at is that I'd like to see that the trail, the traffic on the trail that gets looked at when it comes to any kind of traffic safety analysis be based on projected future increases, and I'm thinking far off into the future, like not 5 years, 10 years. So I guess as far as linking it to a specific goal that is enumerated in transportation planning documents that I'm not conversant in, but if staff can offer any kind of, if there's already established goals or targets for reducing vehicle trips within the city as part of any, or more regional based, I'm thinking HCOG maybe, that would transition away from existing transportation patterns where much of it is vehicle based. I'd like to see it linked to a future where the users of the trail are at a percentage of the population of Eureka that is expected to be riding bicycles in the future, not the current trends or doubling the current users of the trail. Is there a way to link it to something that is a projection that would be, even if it's aspirational? Does the staff have any possible suggestions there?
That's a tough one. We struggle with projections in a lot of ways. There was a lot of projections in the way the city was built out based on Eureka growing rapidly, and it hasn't grown. We've actually, seen pretty slow growth rates. I'm not aware of targets that we could, if you're talking about transition of cars to bikes, people transitioning from using cars to riding bicycles. I don't know, Scott, do you have any numbers that you're thinking of that could be tied back to that as far as a target? And I guess you're talking about, when you're talking about these volumes, are you talking about for designing, what aspect of the trail would you be, I guess, thinking of? The entire like class one, every aspect of it, be like tried to project out to some future growth it's less of a growth population because our population isn't moving much, but I guess more of a transition in user types. Scott, any thoughts on that?
To clarify just real quick, I'm not trying to say how wide does the class one segments need to be. Those are dictated already as far as I'm concerned. It would be in analyzing crossings or safety in segments of the trail, and not undercounting the usage based on current rates of use. Like, it should be designed for a future scenario with a much more robust amount of cyclists in the city.
Yeah.
Off existing motorized vehicles.
Let me jump in there because you're saying a lot of words and I'm kind of getting lost there a little. But I think what you're trying to get at is when you typically do a warrant study, you're doing an evaluation of traffic volumes, whether it be pedestrians, bicyclists, or vehicles. I think what you're getting at here is include for any studies that are done for this intersection, the intersection improvement should include projected future pedestrian or non-motorized volumes. And so if you include a wording such as that, I think that'll cover that. But in a nutshell, is that what you're trying to get at?
It is, and beyond just broadly project. I mean, projected could be projected for tomorrow, projected for a week from now, or a year from now. But projected based on, if we're making commitments or believing that as part of our VMT reduction, GHG, we don't have a certified climate action plan right now, but there are things that will push us to carve off existing vehicle traffic into other forms of transportation. And to the extent that there are benchmarks or milestones that are in other documents by other agencies or in other parts of the planning documents of the city, using those as the touchstone for.
Well, Commissioner Lazar, I believe I understand what you are asking for, and it sounds like, a number. You're looking for a year based on some sort of existing planning document. And I think the state has some VMT reduction goals, and we could probably find the number if you wanted to. But HCOG's regional transportation plan, their VROOM, the variety in rural options of mobility, is being updated right now. The plan length is 2022 to 2042. We could say like plan for the ultimate build out based on HCOG's modeling and plan for 2042.
I like that. I mean, I thought it was going to come from HCOG. I was just waiting to see if staff was going to clue in on that, because to me that seems like the one that's most likely concerned with transitioning existing populations of transportation users to different modes.
Well, it says the plan is intended to identify and document specific actions to address the region's needs for connectivity, mobility, equity, and accessibility for the next 20 years. So I'd say aligning it with their planning horizon would make a certain amount of sense.
I would add that the existing regional transportation plan, the existing document from HCOG, is all about, or a section of it about trails is about mode shift and about increasing trail usage. Right now, there aren't any specific goals as far as a percentage goes or anything like that, but it's something that we can take into account as the next document is developed when framing what comes next with the Beta Zoo Trail.
I think that gets to the heart of what I was trying to say. And to the extent that it's not a known thing yet, we can't do much about that. But I think that's the best place to be pointing if we're gonna.
Maybe the end of this sentence could just say for modeling,
Trail usage?
or modeling trail usage to align with HCOG's 20-year regional transportation plan or something to that effect. So it's tying it back to HCOG's plan.
Commissioner Freitas, do we want to attach this or tie this to a plan that hasn't even been developed yet?
Yeah, it hasn't been adopted yet. That's a good question.
Perhaps we could just do as I've kind of suggested here and just ask for a 20-year projection that would also cover if it takes us heaven forbid, if it takes us 5 more years to be able to fund the project, we would be losing some projection time if we were tied to a certain date.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. Yeah, so I'd be fine with leaving it as it is. And honestly, I'd be fine with making this motion. Are we ready to make this motion?
Please.
Okay, so Kristen, a little bit of guidance here. Do I need to read off everything on here? Or can I basically shorten it to say with the recommendations as, as drafted in coordination with staff or something to that effect?
Yes, I think if you could read the first paragraph down through the yellow part. And I think that would cover it.
Okay. So I move the Planning Commission adopt a resolution adopting findings of facts, response to comments and errata, a mitigation, monitoring, and reporting program, and a mitigated negative declaration for the Bay to Zoo Trail project, changing the term Class 3 bikeways / lanes to bike facility / facilities, and adopting the recommendations as discussed, and to be provided to the City Council within 48 hours of the Planning Commission action and included in the agenda summary for the RFP.
I will second. And can we have a roll call vote on this?
Yes, we can. Is everyone ready? Commissioner Freitas?
Aye.
Commissioner Lazar?
Yes.
Commissioner Meyer?
Yes.
And Commissioner Arriaga?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Holy cow, good job, team. One item down.
How's everybody feeling? Are you feeling good to power through the next item, everyone, or do we need a 5-minute recess?
5 minutes, please.
Staff, if we can take 5 minutes then.
Happy to do that, yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Looks like she's having a beer.
She's back now.
Oh, that was Mayor.
That's Commissioner Mayor, yeah. Commissioner Mayor's got the hookup at Six Rivers. Great. Looks like we're all back now, right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, let's dig into item number 2, staff. Take it away.
Okay, great. Gonna share my screen. Share. Okay, good evening, commissioners. My name is Caitlin Castellano, senior planner. I'm going to present to you this project before you for your consideration tonight is the Humboldt Development Company 3-story addition project, which proposes to redevelop an existing single-story commercial building into a 4-story multi-use building. The project is proposed in Old Town on the northwest corner of 2nd and E Streets, known as 337 2nd Street or 329 or 339 2nd Street. The other 3 corners of this intersection are home to Los Bagels, the Booklegger bookstore, and the Irish clothing store. The site is located 1 block west from the gazebo and 2 blocks south from the waterfront. The existing building proposed to be redeveloped is a single-story structure with 2 tenants. The western tenant space is currently being used as a CPA office under a conditional use permit that was approved in 1988. The eastern tenant space is currently being used by a principally permitted retail event rentals and event coordination business. Depending on the structural feasibility, the walls of the existing building may be retained or full demolition may be necessary. The adjacent building to the west is the 3-story Healy Brothers building. The applicant proposes to add over 1,700 square feet of floor area to the existing building with 3 new floors on an expanded building footprint. The redeveloped building will include, 4 commercial tenant spaces on the ground floor, and these are the red arrows. There's space A, space B, space C, and space D. 1 office associated with space B on the 2nd floor, and 6 residential units, which is in orange, and 7 residential units on the 3rd floor, yellow, which will bring the total residential dwelling units on site to 13, and a special event space with a banquet room and outdoor terraces is proposed on the 4th floor, the rooftop in green. So the project is located in the CW Waterfront Commercial Zone District with a core retail commercial land use designation, which prioritizes visitor serving uses such as commercial retail, restaurants, bars, theaters, museums, and art galleries. Office and residential uses are encouraged on the upper floors of mixed use buildings to support ground floor visitor serving retail businesses and to ensure the presence of people in the area around the clock. All of the proposed uses require a conditional use permit, except for the principally permitted ground floor visitor serving commercial uses. And the proposed uses do align with the zoning and land use designations. The project is located in the coastal zone and requires a coastal development permit. And a variance is required because the project exceeds the maximum allowed density for the CW zone district and does not comply with off-street parking and loading standards. Finally, design review is required for the new construction. So the project is located in the Old Town Historic District, and a number of nearby buildings are listed on the city's local register of historic places. The eastern half of the existing building was constructed in 1946 and the western half in 1960s, but the building is not on the local register and does not meet the criteria for state or national listings, according to the applicant's consultant, who is a licensed architect. For design review, the Planning Commission must consider whether the proposed building is harmonious with the surrounding development, but the commission cannot require new structures to duplicate a historic architectural style. So the applicant proposes to withdraw the existing 1988 conditional use permit for the existing office use in the storefront portion of tenant space A, shown in blue. Ensuring that this ensures that the 2nd Street frontage will not be completely occupied by offices. The applicant proposes to make tenant A space restaurant ready, in addition to it being available for commercial retail. For the tenant B space, staff was originally concerned about the proposed ground floor office space, shown in red, because it is most visually prominent space for a pedestrian at street level with large windows on both 2nd and E streets. And offices are intended to play a secondary complementary role on the ground floor of the CW district because they don't generate the foot traffic or provide the same level of visual interest as visitor serving uses. As a result, staff recommends condition of approval number 1 to include the applicant's dual use proposal as a requirement for any future ground floor office uses. Condition 1 adds flexibility by allowing any principally permitted visitor serving use to be operated in concert with the conditional office use, not just an art gallery. As a result, staff recommends approval of all the proposed conditional uses, including the ground floor office spaces. The project includes 3 variance requests to 1, allow a floor area ratio of 334%, where the maximum floor area ratio for the CW zone district is 250. Remove the requirement to provide an off-street loading berth for commercial establishments. And 3, to reduce the 13 off-street parking spaces required for the 13 residential units to 0. There is an option in the zoning code to pay an in lieu fee per required off-street parking space, but the applicant has indicated that the current fee of $7,500 per space is financially infeasible. Given that the variances allow the proposed building to match the scale, massing, and 0 setbacks of surrounding historic buildings, including the adjacent Healy building, staff believes the variances should be approved. However, the coastal zoning code requires certain findings to be made in order to grant the variances, including consideration of impacts to public parking in the surrounding area. Other than paying the in lieu fee to allow the city to develop more public parking as mitigation, the developer could provide alternative transportation incentives, such as bus passes, to residential tenants in order to encourage less car ownership to decrease on-street parking impacts. The applicant is proposing a bicycle storage room as well as sidewalk bike parking as mitigation, but both are already required by the state's Cal Green Building Code standards. As a result, staff recommends condition of approval number 7, requiring the residential lease agreements include a complimentary bus pass paid for by the property owner during the entire duration of the rental. Furthermore, after the staff report was published, staff realized providing bus passes will ultimately cost the applicant more in the long run than paying the in lieu fee. Approximately 13 years of bus pass fees is about the equivalent of the total in lieu fee. We brought this to the attention of the applicant, and the applicant is contesting the bus pass requirement. The applicant's comments on the condition and staff's response have been provided to the planning commissioners. Because a variance cannot grant a special privilege to one property owner over others in the same district, staff continues to believe mitigation is necessary to compensate for not providing parking or paying the in lieu parking fee, and continues to recommend the bus pass requirement in condition of approval number 7. Overall, the proposed project will benefit the city by investing in an underutilized property in Old Town, increasing the city's housing supply, and adding more space for visitor serving uses near the waterfront, including a unique rooftop event space overlooking the bay. For these reasons, staff recommends the Planning Commission hold a public hearing and adopt a Planning Commission resolution approving with conditions the conditional use permit, design review, coastal development permit, and variance. The coastal development permit decision is not appealable to the Coastal Commission. Here's a suggested motion, and myself and team, as well as the applicant and his architect, are available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. Commissioners, questions for staff so far?
I just have a couple pretty minor ones. It seems very well thought out and well conditioned. So the first question I have is, if they were to pay parking in lieu fees, where does that money go? What's the fund for?
Go ahead, Kristen.
Commissioner Freitas, it would go into a fund that would ultimately be used to pay for development of additional parking, either parking garages or perhaps purchase of property to provide surface parking lots.
My understanding is we would have quite a ways to go before we had enough parking and lieu fees to purchase property or build a parking facility.
That would definitely be correct.
Okay, so it could, just kind of be untouched for many years.
Correct.
Okay, and then my other question is, and this is, a long shot, but do we have any knowledge, does the commission or does staff have any knowledge of what used to be on the site prior to 1946? It's possible it was a building with just as large a massing as they're proposing now.
Yeah, it's my understanding that the previous use was a marine store, but I am going to hand it off to Kristen Kenyon. If you guys haven't met her before, she'll introduce herself, but she has been assisting with this project.
Hi, I'm Kristen Kenyon. I'm a new principal planner. This is my first time in front of the Planning Commission, so hello. I looked at the old Sanborn maps for this property, and I don't believe it was developed prior to the building in 1946.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Welcome, Kristen. Nice to meet you. Meet you.
Thanks.
So staff, could you tell me, are there other buildings that are having to, like, just off the top of your head, who else in this area is having to pay the same parking fees? Is there anyone that are in this similar bracket that have to pay these fees?
I can take this. So it's in the parking assessment district. If anyone wants to propose new residential dwelling units, they either have to provide a parking space per residential unit or pay the fee. So that is inside the parking assessment district. So the commercial uses are exempt, and that is rare for the city in the coastal zone. The parking assessment district in Old Town along waterfront is the only area in the city that exempts, in the coastal zone, that exempts commercial required parking for commercial uses, but requires residential parking. So if anyone came forward and wanted to do a project like this, they would have to do the same thing, pay the fee or provide a parking space.
I have a follow-up question. If that's so, and if granting a variance to take that fee away because it would add up to 97,000 and it would be too expensive, are there other places nearby where you've given that variance, and what happens in the long run if that becomes precedent? Or what made you, I guess, let me get to this question. What made you say yes to a variance and to dismiss that fee, to recommend that we accept that?
We are recommending that they provide bus passes to each residential tenant in lieu of the fee, to support the alternative modes of transportation, to try to limit how many cars, to try to encourage using bicycles and buses instead of having multiple cars on the street.
Right. I get that parking can't always be provided for every tenant, and I like that the city allows developers choice among several in lieu alternatives to meeting those parking spaces. Requirements, I would like it better if the in lieu choices made sense in all cases. And I'm certainly, after reading some of the email that's gone through, it seemed like it's kind of it seems like everyone but the motorist has to pay for the parking, especially the developer owner, in the city indirectly and businesses indirectly around. And the cost of the parking isn't individualized to the person with the actual vehicle. It's sort of collectivized. And so it seems like paying for bus transit passes takes away that demand for the parking space. I think that's the intention. But if the tenants don't use the bus passes and they park on the street anyway, then both the city and the landowner lose. And so I guess I don't like a lose-lose scenario. And I'm wondering, does this kick the can down the road into more and more lose-lose scenarios? And should we be concerned about that?
Kristen, do you want to try addressing Commissioner Benson's concerns?
So I think, as kind of alluded to before, if the property owner were going to choose to pay the in lieu fee, that's, I think, another method of kind of kicking the can down the road, because we would have to wait until there was enough funds in the account to be able to develop garage or purchase property. We would need to have a location to do either one of those two things. So I understand what the concern you're expressing about it's the burden is being put on the developer. But the developer is the entity who's choosing to do the development in the first place.
Right. Are there any other models that we're not thinking about, like designated shared parking spaces or offsite parking that's more designated to the people in that building? Or, I'm not a parking specialist, but are there other alternatives for us to consider here?
So it's possible that offsite parking could be allowed, but it may also require a use permit and a coastal development permit in order to be able to approve that.
Got it. Yeah.
And again, we need to have the location. Usually something that's within 300 feet of the site of the project.
I haven't been on the planning commission long, but I've certainly noticed that, there can be consistency with zoning and it can be harmonious, and we can be all for it in so many ways. And parking, it boils down to parking so often. Oh my goodness. And here we are again, boiling it down to parking.
I concur. Well, was there any other comments or questions by the commission before we open it up to public comment and then bring it back to us? So I kind of would like, go ahead, Commissioner Lazar, sorry.
Yeah, I wanted, Senator Castellano, can you clarify? I believe you said the variance is to allow for a greater number of units than would otherwise be authorized. Is that correct? It's not for the actual parking, the failure to pay an in lieu fee. That you have a condition that you're offering, but the variance is for the number of dwelling units?
No, the variance is to exceed the maximum floor area, regardless on if it was a residential use or an office use. So the CW zone district is a 250% floor area, which is, like, we want to think about 2.5, FAR. So so the variance is to exceed the floor area, maximum floor area, as well as allow them to not provide parking for the residential uses, which in the parking assessment district, they're exempt from providing parking spaces for commercial uses, but not exempt for residential uses.
So it's twofold. It's the floor area, and it's to not provide parking for the units that are not commercial, that are residential units.
Correct, as well as for a loading facility in the back.
Oh, there's not a waiver of that like in the county? It's a variance every time? Okay.
No.
And just to remind the commission, we are dealing in this particular instance with the zoning regulations that we have in the coastal zone. They've not been updated yet. So all of the inland exemptions and exceptions and, less restrictive requirements that we have, unfortunately, just don't apply to this particular project because of its location. And if I could just add, Commissioner Benson asked about how staff was able to recommend approval of the variances. Sometimes the benefit of the project to the city as a whole can outweigh the shortcomings, so to speak.
Understood. Could you explain perhaps Kate Castellano a little bit, when you said exceeds maximum density, how so? Help me understand that better.
It's the floor area. It's essentially the floor area ratio. So,
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, that's how you meant. Okay, the maximum density. Okay.
They just use different language in the coastal zone as the inland. And sorry.
And looking in the crystal ball, is there anything that we approve in this recommendation tonight if we were to vote to take this motion as written that could come back and haunt us with the Coastal Commission or relative to the LCP or any of that? Do you have any heartburn about this passing, getting your way tonight?
No, because it's in a non-appealable area of the Coastal Commission, so
Okay.
they have no jurisdiction over it.
Thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I thought that if we are taking up a use permit and it's not the principally permitted use, that in and of itself makes the project appealable to the coastal. Not the mapping, not the actual area of the coastal zone, but the actual, because the Coastal Act includes provisions for non-principally permitted uses being subject to appeal.
That appealability criteria, it applies only to coastal counties.
Oh. All right, guilty for that. All right, thank you. I have one last question. There's 5 findings I'm finding in 155.41. I'm not sure if I'm in the coastal or inland zoning regulations. These are the findings for approval of a variance. Are they this? Is that the right section?
If you are online on American Legal Online, the 155 is not correct, or 156. We actually have, Kristen, do you want to explain what's going on with the zoning code in the coastal zone?
So it would be what we refer to as the old code that's found on our development services library page on the website. Unfortunately, because we have not updated the coastal zoning code or the implementation plan, it's not available online in American Legal. It's only available as a PDF document.
Well, maybe we'll hear some public comment, but in the meanwhile, if you can pull up the findings that are unique to the coastal zoning regulations with respect to variances, that would be helpful.
Sure. Let's see here. Here, I should share my screen. You can see where I'm going.
Also, one last question that won't require much technical, answering. When are we slated to hear the LCP update? When are we gonna start receiving information on that? I'm curious.
At this point in time, I don't have a really good timeline for you. We want it to be done as soon as possible, but at this point in time, we are still at the administrative staff level draft. So I wouldn't think that you'd be seeing anything before the end of this year. Hopefully early to spring of next year, fingers crossed kind of thing.
Okay, I mean, that's really not too far from now. The sooner the better, yeah, because it leads to some very, tight rope walking, tenuous policy balancing for everyone.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm looking at the drainage plan now and the green roof. There's a lot I really like about this building. And one of the things in particular is the green roof plan. I'm curious the percent of the, the 95th percentile storm that this green roof is going to be able to take. What's the capacity of this green roof? Can anyone speak to that?
The applicant and his architect is on the call if they wanted to elaborate on that, or Kristen can.
If we had 1 inch in 24 hours, how much would run off this roof?
May I make a suggestion? Why don't we open a public comment and let the applicant speak first and see if some of these things are addressed and then go from there.
Fair enough.
And they do have the variance section pulled up if Commissioner Lazar would still like to review that.
Yeah, I think I pulled it up in the meanwhile. So if we need to see it with the whole commission, we could do it then. But I think
maybe we could view it during the discussion. I would like to see it as well.
Oh, sure.
And just for clarification, it is on page 26 and 27 of your staff report.
Thank you, Kristen. Let's let the applicant speak and see where we're at.
Hey, good evening. Will Adams, project owner and applicant. First, I just want to say thanks to the city staff so far for the work on this project. Really looking forward to this. My office is about a half block from here, so I've been kind of having my eye on this for several years now. I would like to speak a little bit more about parking a little bit later, but I think we can answer Mr. Benson's question about the green roof, and I'll turn it over to my architect, Garrett McSorley, for technical questions.
Hello, hi, I'm Garrett McSorley. Thanks for your nice project presentation, Caitlin, and for Kristen, your work on the project review. On the roof planter, you can see on sheet 8 of the drawings, there's a table that includes the percentage of permeable surfaces. And I know that your question is regard to the percentage of stormwater that can be retained, but the table I'm referring to shows you the area that would be included as a green roof of 830 square feet, which is as compared to the existing lawn that's on that back alley driveway access now. It's within the parcel of 586 square feet. So we're increasing that planter area from 586 to 830 square feet. And the full drainage calculation in accordance with the LID manual and everything, that'll be all part of the building permit application. That's a condition of approval to the project to comply with all the stormwater regulations. So I'd be happy to answer any of the questions that I can, but thanks for your time.
Thank you, Garrett. Commissioners, do you have any questions for the applicant or for Garrett McSorley before we open it up to public comment, if there's any on this?
We might want to give it back to the applicant to say what he'd like to say about parking before we move on.
Go ahead, Mr. Adams.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to object to, I think it's condition 7 on the bus passes. I don't foresee all 13 tenants using a bus pass every month. I just think that's kind of highly unlikely. You know, adding the fee is also a little bit hard to stomach while the city is actively building on its parking lots right now. Seems kind of just doesn't seem quite right to be doing that at this time. I did speak with City Manager Slattery a little while ago before the meeting started, and he raised the possibility of maybe leasing a few parking spaces, city-owned parking spaces that are down the alley, which I think would be a much better idea. I think he was talking about the parking lot either on D and First, or the other one on E and First. That I think, you know, if we had maybe 4 or 5 lease spaces that tenants could use, might be a better solution than the fee or the bus passes.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. I definitely want to dig into that item when it kicks back to us on the commission. Did we have anyone here for public comment?
Madam Chair, we had no one who asked to speak on this item tonight.
Okay, so let's kick it back to the commission then, and let's dig into this.
Well, I was pleased to hear the applicant that there's been some further discussion with City Manager Slattery in terms of, you know, looking at other options and leasing some parking spaces, you know, 4 or 5 is what I heard the applicant said. I mean, that sounds like a positive, you know, motion forward to bearing some of the responsibility or additional responsibility of having actual places that take a car as opposed to a bus pass that may or may not be used. I'd like to do the math in my head and see that there's some places there that motorists from that building can actually put their cars. So I'm curious, maybe this is a question for staff, how could we incorporate that into the conditions of approval in some manner that would be acceptable? I'd love to see that happen tonight and maybe be incorporated into this. Something like that. I know maybe it's just very premature in the discussions, but would feel a lot more comfortable if there was something kind of solid, or at least a recommendation to explore that further and try to get a balance of maybe some percentage of the parking spaces being covered by lease as opposed to all by bus pass, since it seems like the bus pass thing isn't necessarily gonna work.
I talked to the city traffic engineer, Scott, about this, and apparently we used to lease spaces. So there's some existing reserved spaces in our public parking lots in the area for residential development, like older residential development, but that's not something that we do currently, and that's why we weren't proposing it. But maybe it could be, if it's possible, then that's the way to go kind of condition. Maybe Kristen has some thoughts on that.
So the CW Waterfront Commercial Zone District is one of the zone districts that does require a use permit to provide the parking on a separate lot, provided that lot is located within 300 feet of the use for which the spaces are required. So if we wanted to look at the possibility of providing parking off the site, the applicant would need to modify the use permit application. We would have to renotice it and come back to the Planning Commission at some future time for consideration of that use permit, or that modification to the use permit.
Is there a parking lot with leasable spaces within 300 feet?
I don't know if there's available leasable spaces, but I did see that the parking lot at First and E as well as First and D are within 300 feet.
I personally think that the idea of leasing public parking, isn't necessarily a very good idea. Commissioner Benson was talking about what precedent might it set. I mean, the idea of every new development having the option to lease up a handful of parking spaces in a city lot doesn't seem very sustainable either, frankly.
Right.
I don't know if that's really going to work in the long term. And it isn't an option that I know of that's been offered to anyone else recently. So I don't know, if we could really offer that without it seeming sort of, arbitrary and capricious and so forth. So I have some concerns about that, but I do appreciate the point, being made, but there may be other ways to approach it.
Just for clarity on my part, since I think it's hard to quantify who else falls into the having to pay the parking, fees. Because again, like Caitlin, I was asking you that, but like in this area, do you guys have a number of buildings that are in that same bucket that are having to pay the parking fees, or that are prescribing to like the bus ticket variance? I'm just curious, like how many people are actually required to do this for the city? And yeah, that's just my main question too. When did this, and just part of my ignorance though, when did this parking, when did the parking mandate actually take place? Is this something newer, or it seems like it's older? Just can you educate me on the timelines of the requirements?
So the parking assessment district has existed since the 50s. It was created with the idea that the property owners within the assessment district would pay into a fund that would then be used for the creation of parking, again, either through purchase of land for parking lots or for garages or some other way of providing off-street parking. The funds that were collected originally from the parking assessment district actually did buy some parking lots. The one at 8th and G Street, for example, is one of the lots that was purchased through Parking Assessment District funds. And if you're interested, I can find the list of the rest of them too. I don't know them all off the top of my head. I believe that the language that allows the in lieu fee to be paid for parking. So either, sorry, let me take one step back. So the code either requires that you pay or that you provide off-street parking based on the calculations provided in the code, or it can allow you to pay the parking in lieu fee, meaning that you're paying a fee instead of providing the parking spaces. I think that that has been in the coastal zoning code since probably at least the mid 60s. We have had at least one other development that I am aware of that did pay the in lieu fees, probably in the 1980s. And since then, folks have either decided to provide parking on the site, or they have chosen to obtain a use permit if necessary and provide parking on adjoining sites. So I hope that answers your questions, Commissioner Ariaga.
Yes, Kristen, thank you very much.
Just to add to that, I was looking at the permitting for the new development at 2nd and I Street, and there was a note in the file that they provided one they provided an in lieu fee for one parking space there. I mean, yeah.
I'm sorry, they ended up not having to do that.
Oh.
So if I understand you correctly, Principal Planner, yeah, it's, there's been little use of a variance strategy for parking. It's been either off-street parking, payment of the in lieu fee, or providing it on site. Is that what I understood you to say?
Recently, I would say yes, that is correct, that there have not been a lot of variances, or even any, I'm trying to think, variances for parking in 10 or more years ago. I think there were probably some more variances for parking that were provided at that time. They're just not very common now.
And it seems like the trigger for parking is redevelopment or new development. I mean, or residential development, because it seems like commercial and other uses don't trigger parking. So it's really in the Old Town area, to the extent that we've seen new development or redevelopment of sites, that's where we're going to see this issue arise like it is tonight.
At least until we can get a new implementation plan adopted.
Would now be a good time to verify that I have the correct findings for a variance? I'm willing to take a read here because I've got the coastal zoning regulations downloaded. I'm looking at 10-5.2501. Does that sound right? Okay, so it says that the Planning Commission and Director of Community Development is empowered to grant variances in order to prevent or lessen such practical difficulties and unnecessary physical hardships inconsistent with the objectives of this chapter, as would result from a strict or literal interpretation and enforcement of certain of the regulations. A practical difficulty or unnecessary physical hardship may result from the size, shape, or dimensions of a site or the location of existing structures thereon, from geographic, topographic, or other physical conditions on the site or in the immediate vicinity, or from population density, street locations, or traffic conditions. Costs to the applicant or of strict or literal compliance with the regulations shall not be the sole reason for granting a variance. It does mention that the Community Development Director can grant variances for yard setback areas, height, courts, off-street parking, and loading facilities. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Okay.
And then there are additional findings to be made in section 10-5.2507.1. There's A through F, and then 2 more additional findings specifically for parking and loading in section 10-5.2507.3.
And those are in the staff report, I believe, correct? The findings?
Yes. Begins on page 26 in the staff report.
Well, one possibility in my mind is that we go with staff's recommendation, which the applicant won't like, but provide an out in that if the applicant's able to secure off-street parking in lieu of doing the bus pass approach, then that would be a acceptable way of fulfilling a condition. So making the condition wording tied to an either or.
Or potentially a hybrid, you know, I mean, they can choose whichever option they prefer, or they can provide some spaces and, you know, some fees or so forth.
I really support Commissioner Freitas's idea there, because it'd be nice to not have it be static, because things change over time, right? And it might be nice for there to be an option for the owner as opportunities come up to convert from, you know, paying bus pass fees to providing actual parking spaces, that proportion could change over time and not be set, but be allowed to sort of slide as opportunities arise.
I'm curious with the, I think, you know, across the street, at least over Irish Shop, and then I think over Booklegger as well, there's also residential units. Have they paid this fee in the past to have that happen? Or how are they getting, how do they go about it?
They're grandfathered in.
So they're parking on the street.
Yes.
Another idea to reduce the burden, instead of for the life of the development, the condition could say for as long as the code requires off-street parking for residential uses.
I like that. I mean, because it kind of does speak to the fact that there are a lot of, I mean, the code is, you know, hopefully just one particular point in time. It's not forever. There are a lot of things that were developed prior to the code being adopted, and there will hopefully be a lot of things developed after the code is updated and replaced. And we know that it's imminent. We've talked about it. So it could be, you know, an opportunity to reevaluate the standards, and, you know, we could weigh in on those standards at a policy level then, and so would the council. So I like the direction that's going.
I would
So
offer,
can
oh, sorry, go ahead.
can I ask then, like, what's the timeline of these fees that they're supposed to be paid? Like, when would they be expected? Is it like the completion of the project, or is it beginning? Like, because I am assuming, you know, with construction and things, this would take a long time. And if we're talking about code changing, like, I just want to, you know, be clear, like, is it, you know, yeah, when is it?
They would be required to pay the fees prior to receiving certificates of occupancy for the residential uses on the site.
The fee being the bus pass fee?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant the in lieu fee.
I don't think the in lieu fee is on the table, so it's,
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about the variance fee, you know?
well, the staff recommendation is to do the bus stop or bus pass approach. So
Yeah. But when would that be required to, you know, do the bus, like that approach? I'm just trying to wrap my head around this whole thing. So it's like, if you don't opt for the bus passes and you go, so that's, you know, the occupancy. So what's the ladder?
So the bus pass fees would be paid directly to Humboldt Transit Authority for annual bus passes for each of the residential units. And that would need to be done at the time that the residential unit is rented or leased.
Okay, thank you.
And I think you said this, but to clarify, that would be for a 10-year period. Is that right?
The proposal right now is that it's in perpetuity.
In perpetuity, okay. So I could see how that could stack up times infinity.
Yep.
Well, yeah, I think maybe putting a time limit could be another way to curtail the cost. You know, 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
These spaces are intended to be housed or used as residences and not like Airbnbs or vacation rentals.
That's correct, yes.
I guess it seemed like earlier Commissioner Freitas was talking about the possibility that the code could change. You know, this is a section of the city code that's pretty stale. And as much as I'd like to be optimistic about it, I think we heard from Principal Planner Getz, it's nothing on the horizon that we could even prognosticate right now. More likely in my mind is that state law will change and tie the hands of the city with respect to, there's a tension here between providing housing in a mixed use environment, such as what's proposed tonight, and providing alternate forms of transportation and dealing with vehicle miles traveled associated with new residential development, and making sure that new development incorporates measures to promote other ways of getting people to and from where they live. And so on the one hand, I think that a project like this might not require any parking in the future because of state laws that will likely tie the hands of local governments. But on the other hand, I think that a project like this will be required to provide other measures to deal with vehicle miles travel. And this is in a location where vehicle miles travel, it's close to a bus stop. It's feasible for people to take the bus. If we were talking about something in a more of the outskirts, it wouldn't necessarily make sense. So, you know, when looking at those two kind of dynamics, I'm more inclined to be supportive of this being just basically a project that's a little bit too early to enjoy the benefits that are likely forthcoming with changes in state law. But it doesn't help us with making the variance findings tonight, because that we don't get to say in the future, this won't matter. We have to talk about it as it exists right now. And so I think in trying to create some kind of dynamic relief, we can at least point to changes in either state or local regulations as a way of excusing the developer from having to continue to pay those fees. But I think beyond that, I wouldn't be comfortable just waiving the bus stop approach. If the in lieu fee is not going to be used, then I think it needs to either fall on providing equivalent parking elsewhere or bus passes. That's my feeling on it.
I would, this is Garrett McSorley here. I think I would be in support of what you just said and including a 10-year limit on that. So either provide bus passes or off-site parking with a lease and the use permit approval for that particular use for a period of up to 10 years. Or you could adjust the number of years down, but I think it's important to note that we're discussing the developer paying this bus pass fee. we really should be considering the fact that it's the tenants, the residents who will be paying that fee. I know we want to put it on the developer. We need to recognize that all development, you know, there's no free lunch in here. This is not a subsidized project by any means. And so all fees and operating costs that are put on the project ultimately must be paid by the tenants and residents. There's no other way around it. And the goal is to, you know, over a long period, it still is a good investment for the developer, but we can't just arbitrarily add costs. And so in this case, we'd be adding a built-in bus pass or off-site parking for a period of up to 10 years, which would be great while we go through a transition of transportation options and resources and additional trails and, you know, more bus routes and bus shuttles and other transportation options and electrification of our vehicles. But making that a condition indefinitely for the life of the project is a burden that, you know, really puts the property management in the position of, you know, purchasing bus passes for the tenants. I mean, the tenants can go and purchase their own bus passes, but if the landlord is now having to collect fees and additional rent from the tenant just to turn around and buy a bus pass for them that they may or may not want, it seems like it's, you know, in the long term, not a good solution. In the short term, maybe it really is. It could boost bus ridership and be an attractive thing for people who are going to live in this building, but just not forever.
Thank you, Mr. McSorley. I, you know, and looking at it, if you were the developer, if, you know, each one of us was the developer and looking at, you know, the codes, the laws, this type of project, which is beautiful, I would love to see this downtown. It is a beautiful design, and we don't have a lot of those. And then you have other buildings who may or not be paying the parking fees, or some people are just grandfathered in. Like it's hard not to like look at it as just, you know, another person who might want to do these projects and just feel frustrated by the overall system. So I sympathize with that completely, because all these catch-22s, and we want to see our city thriving. We need more residential spaces, you know, that are desperately needed. You know, we need more projects like this. So staff, I am looking for guidance. You know, I would love, you know, to put a cap on it, so it's not something that you have to pay forever, you know, like that just seems completely unfair. And yeah, possible thoughts.
I'm reading in the email from Caitlin Castellano that the $50 a month could not be passed on by the landlord to the tenants, and so that would. Can you talk a little bit more about that, Caitlin?
I mean, that is our intention and hope. Whether, I mean, they'll have the lease agreements, it'll be included in there. We don't know how much they're going to charge for their leases now. So that's our hope, but will that happen? It sounds like it won't.
Is it $50 per person or per vehicle owner or per tenant?
Just per unit.
Per unit. Okay. And is $50 a make or break in terms of something still being looked at as affordable housing?
I don't think they proposed this project as affordable housing. It would be market rate.
Okay.
And basically, as I said in the presentation, they will have paid their in lieu fee in, what did I say, 8 years, 7 years or something, if they provided bus passes annually to each residential unit. So that's why we brought it up to the applicant as well.
Okay, thank you.
This is exactly the reason why, I mean, this is a great example as to why we changed the code, right? Outside of the coastal. I know certainly when I came on the commission, and I happen to actually have a report from Rob, the planner, exactly that this these parking conditions, especially in spots like Old Town, were prohibiting any growth. And so this project is really cool and a great thing for Old Town. And I think it's unreasonable in that area to have a parking requirement because there's not space available, and we know that. And I think it's reasonable to expect that if you move into a space in Old Town, that you would know that parking is going to be an issue for you as a resident. And so I think our hands are a little bit tied with the code, and it looks like we're trying to make some conditions, but I appreciate Commissioner Benson always looking out to the future and what that means and what kind of condition that sets for everybody else. So I think we're going to have to tread pretty lightly. And I did like the idea of the leasing spaces, but and I think there are, yeah, you're saying, I think Caitlin said there are lots close enough. And I think that's probably a reasonable solution for me. I think, and we maybe can set a time limit on those leasing spaces until the code can be updated.
If they were to lease spaces at a nearby lot, I believe they would have to resubmit a modified application.
Correct.
So that would be the only caveat, is we wouldn't be able to make the decision tonight.
No, and what's the timeline on something like that? You know, how long is that going to set this project back?
Yeah, probably just a month, you know, I mean, in the scheme of things, not much.
Well, I think the prevailing concept would be that you'd approve the project with the condition that bus passes are provided, or the applicant come back under a separate use permit, application to substitute off-street parking, in lieu of the bus pass, so that the project as a whole can be moved forward, and then that option for leasing a parking space could be brought back as a separate individual issue.
And I would suggest that that does not need to be included as a condition of approval. If the commission chooses to approve what the recommendation is this evening, then the applicant can come back to just modify the application. Sorry, as I was saying that, I was thinking about the modification application. So yeah, if you go forward with approving the application this evening and the applicant decides to come back for modification of the Planning Commission's action, then they would have to pay a fee to modify the application. If, however, they chose to table this item to a future meeting or continue to date certain, and the applicant wanted to work with staff in the interim to make changes, then there would be no additional fee that would be required. So just want to throw that out there for clarification.
And I guess I'd just say, like, nothing we do tonight prohibits anyone who gets an entitlement from modifying what they were granted. That pathway will always be available. It's just, as you were mentioning, Kristen, they can save some time and expense if they wait to get their decision, and so that it can reflect a multiple option scenario that's been noticed.
Correct. And we would actually not need to continue this to date certain, because we would have to renotice the meeting because the application itself had changed.
I'd like to say whatever is decided, I'd like to see some flexibility with this, like, maybe some of it is bus passes, some of it's parking spaces. I don't think the one size fits all is good for everybody. Maybe we have it, it's most likely you've got some tenants who say the bike storage is good enough and I'm gonna walk around Old Town And, you know, the once a month I go to arcade, I'm going to take an Uber or something, or I'm going to take the bus, or I'm going to take a taxi to the airport, something like that. So I think it needs to be a combination of that. I just would hate to see 13 bus passes, you know, 11 of which get thrown away every month and nobody ever uses.
Well, I'm willing to try to make a motion just to see if we can kind of get some movement on this. So how about a motion that we approve the project subject to the conditions of approval, and that that in the event that local or state regulations change to where the requirement for parking has been eliminated or modified, the applicant may be relieved of the requirement to provide the bus passes, and that we set and in no event shall the owner be required to pay for bus passes for longer than 10 years.
I'll second that.
Any other comments, commissioners, or is this a roll call vote? All right, let's go with a roll call vote.
All right, Commissioner Meyer? Did we lose her? Okay, Commissioner Freitas?
Aye.
Commissioner Lazar?
Yes.
Commissioner Benson?
Aye.
Commissioner Meyer?
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Okay. And Commissioner Arriaga?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Okay.
Thank you again, Mr. Adams. I am really excited about this project, and I wish you the best of luck and all the success. I think it's great that you're trying to add this to Eureka, so thank you.
Thanks to the commission.
Sorry, I dropped off there. I think my internet is saying enough is enough. That wraps up our public hearings for tonight, and then moving us on to business. Staff, is there any old business or new business to attend to tonight?
There is not.
Reports and communications.
So I'm going to give you a really short report due to the lateness of the hour, and we can certainly expand on it at the next meeting. As the applicant mentioned regarding development of housing on city-owned parking lots, there have been some changes that we have proposed to the Department of Housing and Community Development to swap out, for lack of a better term, some of the proposed parking lot locations with other properties that would be acquired for the city's use. So we are at this point in time looking at or talking with HCD about making those changes. We've also kind of run into an issue with the Surplus Lands Act and trying to be in compliance with that. But just like I say, very generally and very briefly, and I can expound more at our next meeting, the potential is there that there will be some changes.
Awesome, Kristen. Thank you for that. I definitely would love to expand upon it with fresh eyes and fresh minds.
And that's what I had for you this evening.
Great. Well, I just want to say thank you to staff and the fellow commissioners for your dedication to everything and for a productive session tonight. So I believe with that, we are adjourned, and until next month.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.